Welcome to Voldemort. Today's adventure. What if Harry was son of Apollo and his Patronus was forged from pure sunlight? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The boy with hair like morning. The garden of number 4 had been pruned into a fortress of geraniums, and Harry Potter was on his knees in the wet earth at 6 in the morning, doing the kind of work his aunt did not want her neighbors to see her doing. The geraniums had no opinion of him. The dew did. It clung to the crown of his head, and where it caught the early light coming pale over the rooftops of Privet Drive, it made his hair the color of new pennies of a held flame. He did not know this. It was something other people noticed and pretended they had not. "Boy," called Aunt Petunia from the kitchen window, "if you are going to make a show of it, do it round the back." "There is no round the back," Harry said. "It is the same garden. Don't be clever." He pulled another weed. The dirt smelled of last night's rain, and the lavender Aunt Petunia kept along the fence to be the kind of woman who kept lavender along the fence. Somewhere in the kitchen Dudley was being fed bacon. Somewhere in the kitchen Uncle Vernon was telling the radio what was wrong with the country. The day was going to be hot. The sun was already saying so on the back of his neck, in a way that did not quite hurt and did not quite not. He had stopped wondering, years ago, why he liked the early light. Most boys liked sleep. He liked to wake before the others and sit on the back step with his hands warming on the wood, the way other boys his age petted dogs. He had told no one. He had also stopped wondering, years ago, why old women on the high street stared at him as he passed, and once, a teacher in year 3 had said, "Potter, what an unusual head of hair you have," and then never said another word to him for the rest of the term. There was a lot Harry had stopped wondering about. He had a small list, kept in a hollow box in his head, of things he would consider one day when there was time. The list included why his cousin's friends sometimes flickered like televisions with bad reception when they tried to corner him, why his hair grew back overnight, why Mrs. Figg's cats watched him the way the boys at school did not, why his eyes saw, faintly but reliably, a little farther than other people's. The boy in the back of the classroom had complained last term that no one could read the handwriting on the board. Harry had not had the heart to tell him he could read it from where he sat, second row from the back, and had been able to read smaller things still for as long as he could remember. Boy, coming. He pushed himself up, earth on his knees, earth on his hands. He went round to the kitchen door, and Aunt Petunia, without looking up from her toast, said, "Wash, then go and post these. There's a stamp on the table, just the one, and I have counted them. All right. And do not loiter, all right, and do not speak to anybody, all right, and come straight back, all right." She stopped buttering. She looked at him for half a second, the small, dry look that was the closest thing she ever offered him to an opinion. Her mouth thinned. Then she went back to her toast. He did the washing up at the sink. The water came out warm. He had been told often that the water in this house came out cold in the morning. It did not when he ran it. He had stopped wondering about that too. It was as he was walking back from the post box, the empty envelope still warm in his pocket from the press of his hand, that he saw it. A man was standing in the shade of a plane tree at the corner of Magnolia Crescent. He was very old, or perhaps not old at all. He was wearing an overcoat in July. He was looking at Harry the way a man looks at a problem in a textbook he has solved, but the answer surprises him. Harry kept walking. The man did not move. Harry kept walking. When he turned at the gate of number 4, the man was gone. He had not heard him go. He had not seen him go. He was simply not there. Harry let himself in, hung his jacket on the peg, and did not tell anybody. The list in the hollow box in his head got one item longer. It was 3 days before his birthday that the first letter came. It was not a remarkable letter. The remarkable letter was the second, which was identical to the first, and then the third, which was identical to the second. The remarkable letters were the 4 that came on Tuesday, and the 12 that came on Wednesday, and the 60-odd that came down the kitchen chimney on Thursday in a soft, hot rush like cinders the wrong way up. By that point, Uncle Vernon's face was the color of a beetroot at a school fair. By the time Harry was in the back of the car, with his cousin sweating beside him and his aunt's handbag jammed against his ribs, Uncle Vernon had begun to drive without a destination, and that, Harry had observed, never ends well. They ended in a hut on a rock in a sea. There was rain. There was a fire that was not really a fire. There was Dudley making a sound like a kettle in a cupboard, and Aunt Petunia speaking to no one through the wall, and Uncle Vernon, with the rifle in his lap, declaring that no one would find them. Harry thought about saying that someone had already found them 68 times, but did not. He sat by the cold ash of the fire and watched the door. Midnight came in the form of a knock so loud the door fell forward into the room. The man on the threshold had a beard like a hedgerow and an umbrella that should not have been able to hold itself together, and when he ducked under the lintel he had to bend his knees twice. He shut the door behind him by lifting it back into the frame with one hand. He looked round the hut with mild distaste, as if he had expected better of a hut. "Sorry Abu that," he said. Uncle Vernon raised the rifle. The umbrella made a small motion that Harry did not quite see. The barrel of the rifle bent like wet licorice. "You'll be Harry," said the man, turning, and the room smelled all at once of wood smoke and wet wool and something deeper, something that lived under earth. "Yes," Harry said before he knew he had said it. "Last time I saw ye were a baby." "All right," Harry said. "Would ye like a cup o' tea?" "All right." The man, whose name was Hagrid, made tea on the dead fire, and the dead fire became an alive fire while he was looking at it. He took out a slightly squashed cake, with green icing that read "Happy Birthday, Harry," and Harry, who had not had a birthday cake in his memory, sat with it on his lap and could not put a finger to it. "Eat it, lad." All right. He ate it. It was the best thing he had eaten in his life so far, which, he privately thought, was not as high a bar as Hagrid seemed to think. Hagrid told him many things that night in a voice that broke twice. He told him about a school. He told him about a man with a name and another name, the second of which Hagrid would not say. He told him about a green light and a small house and a baby who lived. He told him when Harry asked about his parents, and his eyes shone like wet stones in the firelight. And he said his mother had been the brightest soul he ever knew, the brightest soul. And there were them as said brighter than any witch in 100 years. Harry sat on the floor with his arms round his knees and his cake half-eaten beside him, and after a while he said, "She was clever then." "She was clever," Hagrid said, "and she was kind, and she had this, one know what I mean, lad, she had this way about her. People who knew her said she lit a room when she walked into it. Her friends said it. Her teachers said it. Even old Snape said it once, and he wouldn't say a kind word about a Christmas tree." "Snape? Never mind that. He's a teacher up at the school. He was never mind." Harry looked at the cake. He thought about a woman who lit rooms. He thought about her son, who was sitting on a damp wooden floor in a hut on a rock in the sea, and who had been told all his life that the only thing about him worth noticing was his rudeness. "All right," he said again, because he had not yet learned other words for what he meant. Hagrid put a hand on his shoulder that was the size of a Christmas ham, and the touch was very careful, and Harry did not move. Diagon Alley smelled of new ink and goat. It was full of people in robes and people in capes and people in what Harry, who had attended one school assembly in fancy dress, identified as the costumes of stage magicians, except worn with the unself-conscious confidence of those who did not know they were costumes. Hagrid took him through it on his shoulder for the crush, and put him down at the steps of a marble building that had a door wide enough to admit a horse. There were goblins inside. Harry, who had been raised on a small library of Aunt Petunia's gardening magazines, had no opinions about goblins. They had opinions about him. "This way, please," said the goblin at the desk, in the tone of one who had been doing this since the founding of his branch, and quite possibly since the founding of his vault, and who would do it long after Harry was a footnote in someone else's family tree. In the cart, in the dark, with the wind tearing at his hair, Hagrid clutching the side and Harry leaning into the rush as if it were sea air, he laughed. He had not laughed like that in some time. The goblin glanced at him sideways and did not comment. The wand shop was on a side street. It had one wand in the window, on a faded purple cushion, and the shop bell rang itself when they entered. "Mr. Potter," said the man inside before Harry had said a word, "I have been wondering when I should see you." He came forward. He was small. His eyes were very pale. He held Harry's hand in both of his and turned the palm up and pressed his thumb very gently into the soft place at the base of Harry's wrist. Said Mr. Ollivander. He let go. He fetched a box. He took out a wand, gave it to Harry, took it back almost at once. He fetched another. He took it back. He fetched another. "Tricky customer, eh? Sorry. Don't be sorry, be patient." The shop got bright around the 11th wand. The shop got brighter still around the 20th. By the 28th, when Mr. Ollivander pulled down a slim box from a high shelf with the look of a man at a chess game who has seen the end 3 moves out, the windows of the wand shop were faintly luminous and the dust in the air was visible, every mote of it like motes in a chapel. "Holly," Mr. Ollivander said. "Phoenix feather. 11 inches. Try." Harry took it. The light in the shop did not flare. The light in the shop sat down, the way a dog sits at its master's foot. The dust ceased to dance. A warmth rose under Harry's collarbone, and his hand on the wand was an old hand, a hand that had been holding something like this for longer than he had been alive. "Curious," said Mr. Ollivander. "What's curious?" The little man stepped back from the counter. He did not answer at first. He was looking at Harry's wand arm where it lay along the wood. He was looking at it the way the old man on Magnolia Crescent had looked at him 3 days ago. "There is sunlight in your wand arm, Mr. Potter," he said. "I have not seen that since, well, I have not seen it. I have only read of it. Once. In a hand my master shook in 1903. He laughed, a dry laugh, polite and faintly afraid. "7 galleons. The wand is yours." Hagrid, who had not been listening, paid the 7 galleons with a happy cluttering of coins. They were on the street again. The day had got hot. "Sunlight," Harry said. "What's that?" "Nothing." He did not put the wand in his pocket. He held it in his hand the whole way back to the leaky cauldron, and he did not let go of it on the train back to Surrey. And when he was sleeping that night with Hedwig's cage on the floor by the bed, his hand, in the dark, lay on the wand under his pillow as if on someone else's hand. The list in the hollow box got 1 item longer. The platform was easy enough, once he had understood the trick of it. It was, like most tricks, less terrifying once you had walked through it. The train was a hot red animal exhaling into the morning. He found a compartment with a boy his age in it and sat down opposite him. The boy was tall and freckled and had, by his pockets and his sleeves, several brothers ahead of him in the queue of life. He looked at Harry for a beat and then he said, "Bloody hell." "What? You're him, aren't you?" "I'm Harry." "I know who you are, bloody hell." The boy ran his hand through his hair. "Sorry, Mum'll kill me, I'm Ron Weasley. There's a lot of us. Don't say bloody hell when she's about." He blinked. He looked at Harry's hair the way the teacher in year 3 had looked at it. "Sorry," he said again, more quietly. "It's just your hair. It's hair." "Yeah," Ron said with great willingness to drop the subject. "Yeah, no, course it is." A girl came to the door of the compartment after a while. She had a great deal of hair and she had a way of standing in a door frame that suggested she had been standing in many door frames recently. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost a toad." "No," said Ron, and at the same time Harry said, "Sorry." She looked at them. She looked at the open packet of crisps between them, which was Ron's, and the open trunk Harry had not yet shut, which was Harry's. She came in. She sat down. She took without asking a crisp. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Yes. I'm Hermione Granger. Actually, I read about you in a book, 3 books." She said this without preening, a little out of breath. "You weren't easy to research. There's almost nothing factual, mostly hagiography and a worrying amount of fan poetry." "All right," Harry said. "Have you tried any spells yet?" I have. I read all the textbooks. I tried a few." She produced a wand and pointed it at Ron's nose where there was a smear of something. "Actually, I might fix that for you." "Don't." A flicker. The smear was gone. Ron stared at her, then at his own nose, then at her wand. "Bloody hell." "Don't say bloody hell." "Bloody hell." She sat back, satisfied. She turned to Harry. She seemed about to ask a question, and her gaze went, in the way of all gazes, to his hair. "It's hair," Harry said. "Yes," she said, without offense. It's catching the light very oddly. That's a thing it does. Has it always, since I had hair?" Ron, who had been watching this exchange like a man at a tennis match with a vested interest in neither player, said, "Anyone want a cake, mums? They're not as bad as they look." The cake was passed round. The compartment got dim, gradually. As the train slid north into the longer afternoon, Harry took a corner of cake and listened to Ron explain wizard chess and Hermione explain why wizard chess was an inefficient pedagogy for spatial reasoning. And the train went on, and the green country ran past the window, and for some while Harry was, by the standards of the hollow box in his head, very nearly happy. Then the train slowed. Then the train stopped. The cold came first. It came up through the floor of the carriage, as if someone had opened a hatch onto a cellar that had not been ventilated since the war. The breath of the 3 of them went white, and the windows webbed with frost from the inside, and the cake on Ron's lap fell over and the icing had hardened. "What?" Ron said. The lights in the corridor died in sequence. Harry could hear them dying, small soft pops like wet matches. "Oh," said Hermione, in the small clear voice of a girl who had read about something at length and was now meeting it. "Oh no, that's not good." "Harry." The compartment door slid open without anyone touching it. The thing in the doorway was tall and wrong. It had the shape of a man under a sheet, except where the sheet should have lain on a man's head it was pulled flat, like cloth across a hole. There was a hand at the end of one sleeve. The hand was the worst of it. Harry, who had seen a dead pigeon once on the back step at Privet Drive, saw the same long quietness in the hand. He could not hear Ron. He could hear, instead, a woman saying, "Please, please," and a man laughing, and a green light that did not have a sound, and his own infant voice, which he had never heard, making a sound that he had not made since. Patronus. Hermione was saying somewhere in the cold. "Harry, it's a Patronus, it's expecto." "No, I can't, Harry, you have to." He had not heard the word before. He had not been to the school yet. He had not been taught the spell. He had not been taught any spell. And yet the holly wand in his hand was warm, was warmer than warm, and the hollow box in his head was open and his mother in it. His mother, whom he had only ever seen in one photograph and one dream, was singing. He raised the wand. He did not know what to say. He said instead the only word he had ever said that had felt like a true thing being said. "Mum." The carriage filled with light. Not the hot light of summer. Not the wet pale light of dawn over the geraniums. This was an older light, a light from before light had been agreed upon, a light with a shape. It poured out of the wand and it stood up in the corridor, and it took the form of a chariot. It took the form of horses. The horses were made of the light. The chariot was made of the light. There were 4 horses, and they were yoked, and they did not stand on the floor of the train, but on the air a little above the floor of the train, and the carriage was at noon. The dementor unmade itself. There was no other word for it. It went backward into nothing the way a piece of paper goes into a fire. The horses shook their manes. The horses snorted, soundless. The driver of the chariot was not there and was. Harry could not look at the place where the driver should have been without his eyes moving away again, of their own accord, like a needle slipping off a record. The chariot took 2 steps in midair. The chariot turned. The chariot looked at him. He had the strong sense, the way one has the strong sense of being looked at by a horse one does not know, that he was being measured. Then the chariot was gone, and the carriage was warm, and the lights in the corridor came back on one by one, the way lights come back on after a power cut, and Ron Weasley was sitting on the floor of the compartment with his mouth open, and Hermione Granger was standing very still with her hand on the doorframe, and a small thin trickle of blood was coming out of Harry's nose. "Bloody," Ron said, and stopped. Hermione closed her mouth. She did not close it for long. "Actually," she said, in a voice that was not as steady as she wanted it to be, "actually, that was not a Patronus. That is to say, Patronuses patroni, the corporeal Patronus is a single animal, always. There is a paper, Hermes Sefton, 1923, and there is a treatise, Harry, Patronuses are animals. Patronuses are not, Patronuses do not pull." "Hermione," said Ron from the floor. "Yes." "Sit down." She sat. Harry sat. He had not realized he had been standing. He looked at the wand in his hand. The holly was warm. He pressed his thumb into the wood, and the wood pressed back like a held hand. His nose stopped bleeding. He wiped it on his sleeve. The train started moving again. After a long time, in a voice he did not entirely recognize as his own, he said, "Sorry." "What for?" said Ron. "I don't know." "Don't be," said Hermione, who had decided at some point that she would simply commit to friendship now and audit it later. Outside the window, the country was getting wilder. McGonagall was at the platform when the train pulled in, and she should not have been. The first years were always met by Hagrid, which was a thing the older boys had told the younger boys, with the immemorial confidence of older boys telling younger boys. McGonagall was on the platform with her traveling cloak about her shoulders and her wand in her sleeve, and she had not come for the first years. She had come for Harry. She came along the carriages. She put her face to the window of his compartment. She did not knock. She looked in. Her eyes went to the holly wand in his lap, and they sharpened, and they went to the corner of the seat where the upholstery was a little singed, and they went to the small fading mark on Harry's sleeve where the blood had been. She came round to the door. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Yes, Professor." "Come with me, please, Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley. You will go on with the others. Hagrid is at the boats. Mr. Potter will join you presently." "Yes, Professor," said Hermione, who was already practicing her professorial yesies. "Yes, Professor," said Ron, looking at Harry as if at a man being walked off a pitch. Harry stood up. He folded the wand into his hand. He went after McGonagall along the platform into the dark of the station house, where she stopped and turned and looked at him and said nothing for the length of time it took a single owl, somewhere up in the eaves, to call once. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I should like you to tell me in your own time, in your own words, what happened on this train." He told her. He was not a good teller. He told her about the cold and the lights and the door of the compartment and the hand at the end of the sleeve. He told her he had not known the spell. He told her he had said his mother's name. He told her about the chariot. McGonagall listened. She was a slim woman and tall, and her face had been schooled by 40 years of delinquence into stillness. Even so, by the end of his telling, the corner of her mouth had moved. "4 horses," she said. "Yes, Professor." "Yoked." "Yes, Professor." "And the driver?" "I couldn't know," she said. "No, of course you could not." She drew in a breath. She let it out. "Mr. Potter, the school has a Patronus class in the 3rd year. It is not ordinarily taught earlier. There are reasons. There are also reasons that, by the standards of the class, your spell tonight was not a Patronus. There is no name for what your spell was tonight, Mr. Potter, or there are names. It is not for me to use them here in the dark on the platform of a railway station in the Highlands." She turned. She did not smile. She set her hand only briefly on his shoulder. The hand was warm and dry and stern in the way of a teacher who has decided on you. "Come along," she said. "There is a boat. We will say nothing of this evening to the others until we have decided what to say. Are we agreed?" "Yes, Professor." "Good." They went out of the station house. The sky had gone violet behind the hills. The lake at the foot of the slope was a black plate with the thumbprint of the moon in it. Hagrid, far off, was bawling for first years over the dark water. McGonagall's cloak moved with her. Harry, walking a half-step behind her, looked at his free hand in the moonlight and saw, at the very edge of his vision, that the hand had a thin rim of gold along its outline, and that the rim faded as he looked at it, the way the chariot had faded. And as it faded he heard, very faintly, in some place that was not in his ears, a single string struck on a lyre. He kept walking. He did not say anything to McGonagall, kept the lyre to himself. The list in the hollow box in his head got one item longer and then closed for the night. The sorting hat, when it came down on his head, was warm on the inside. It was not a clean warm. It was the warm of an old room with a fire that had been kept by many hands. The hat said very privately in his ear, "Well." Harry did not answer. Well, still nothing. "I have not had this voice in my brim for some time. You are not the first, Mr. Potter. Pay attention. You are not the first, do you hear me?" "Yes," Harry said in his head. "Good, old shape, yes, old shape and a young one. You are a witch's child, Mr. Potter, before you are anything else. Remember that. Remember that. Remember that. Where shall I put you?" "I don't know. Number you don't, quite all right." The hat seemed to consider. "There is a house here for the brave. There is a house here for the brave who do not know they are brave. There is a house here for the brave whose mothers were braver. We will go with that one." "All right. Gryffindor." The hall, which had been waiting for the hat to make up its mind for an unusually long time, exploded into the sound of one house going off like a bag of crisps in a fire. He took the hat off. He went to the table. Ron, 2 seats down, was already on his feet with the open mouth of a boy who has practiced and not got the chance to use the practice. Hermione, 4 seats down, raised her chin at him and pointed with great primness at the empty space beside her. He sat. The food appeared. Someone shook his hand. Someone clapped him on the back. Someone far up at the staff table was looking at him. He did not have to look up to know which someone. He looked up anyway. The man at the staff table was slim and had black hair to his collar and a face like a struck flint. He had set down his cup. He was looking at Harry the way a man looks across a room at something he had not expected to see again. He did not move. The room round him was making the noises that rooms make. He was not in the room. He was somewhere older, and his eyes, which were black, had gone to a place where at this moment only Harry was. Then the man moved his eyes away. He picked up his cup. He drank. He said something dryly to the witch beside him, and the witch laughed briefly, and the moment, if it had been a moment, was over. Hermione, who had been watching, said, "Who is that?" Harry did not answer. He was not sure he had the breath for it. A boy across the table who had not introduced himself but who was eating with the appetite of a boy with brothers said, "That's Snape. He runs the dungeons. Don't get on his bad side. Apparently he hasn't got a good side." "Oh," said Hermione. "Snape," said Harry. "Yeah, bit of a nightmare, my brother says." Harry put down his fork. The food was good. The hall was full of light, the small, clean, ordinary light of 1,000 candles, and along the high table the headmaster, who was old and bearded and had eyes like someone who had been delighted by life for a long time, was raising a glass to no one in particular and smiling at the ceiling. Outside the long windows the dark was complete. A wind had got up. Somewhere over the lake an owl called. Harry put his hand on the table by his plate. He turned his palm up. The palm was warm. He turned it down again. He did not look at his hair and the polished side of the goblet, although he knew, with the kind of knowing that does not require checking, that it would be catching the candlelight in the way it had caught the dawn in the geraniums, and that somewhere in this hall more than one person was noticing it, and that somewhere in this hall more than one person was choosing, for the moment, not to say. He picked up his fork again. "Snape," he said once more very quietly to no one at the table. He filed the name in the hollow box and shut the lid. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Astronomer's Daughter. The summer of 1979 had been the hottest in Greece for 40 years, and Lily Evans, 2 months pregnant and not yet showing, had been sent up the mountain in a blouse intended for a colder country. She was 21. She had a ministry letter folded in the pocket of her jacket. She had her wand in a leather sheath under the cuff of her left sleeve. She had a notebook in her right hand and a pencil tucked into the band of her hair, and she had, in the small hard kernel of her body where her stomach had been a month ago, the news she had not yet given to her husband. The road to Delphi went up between olives. The cicadas, by mid-morning, made a sound that could be slept through and not woken from. She had passed 3 local shepherds and a goat and a German tourist who tried to tell her, in 3 languages, that there was a storm coming. She had thanked him in 2 of those languages and continued. The storm, when it came, did not announce itself. Greek storms, Lily would later tell her sister, were not weather. They were arguments conducted between mountains. The first sign she had of it was that the cicadas stopped. The second sign was that the goats higher up the slope began to bleat in a particular way, like children at a difficult bedtime. The third sign was that the air on her arms went cold from the elbow down, all at once, as if someone had drawn a line. She broke into a half-run. The ruins were ahead, behind a tumble of stone and a fig tree leaning over the path. She had been on her way to them anyway. The ministry letter said, "We require a discreet survey of the site. There is a question in the Department of Mysteries whether the resonance reported by Reeves in 1934 has decayed or strengthened. We require a witch. We require a competent one, please." She was the competent witch. She made the porch of the temple as the first fat drops came down, and they came down in flat coins that hit the dust and stood up off it before sinking, the way drops do in country that does not see them often. The sky went, in seconds, from white to bronze to slate. The cypress on the slope below her was lashed once and bent. She stepped under the lintel. She put her hand on the stone, and the stone was old and warm. She found a recess where the rain could not reach her. She sat on a fallen capital. She took her notebook out. She wrote in a hand a little hurried by the cold, Day 3, Delphi, storm, resonance, present, strong, almost personal. She underlined personal twice. She put the pencil back in her hair. The thunder did the thing thunder did in Greece, which was not the rolling growl of an English thunder, but a sequence of separate slams, each one closer to the door than the last. The ruins lit up on the second slam. The carved face above the lintel, weathered to almost nothing, was, in the lightning, briefly the face of a man who had been beautiful when he was carved, and who was now, after 2.5 millennia, still recognizable as a man who had not minded being known to be beautiful. She wrote, "He is, in fact, still here." She regretted writing it almost at once. It was the kind of sentence the Department of Mysteries underlined in red. She did not strike it out, however, because she was Lily Evans, and Lily Evans did not strike out true things. The storm went on for an hour. She did not leave. She slept for some of it against the lintel. She dreamed. In the dream there was no storm. There was light, as much light as she had ever seen, and the temple round her was new again, the columns whole, the marble unmarked. And the man on the threshold was the man from the carving, except taller, and made entirely of something that was not flesh, and that resembled flesh only as kindness resembles courtesy. He stood with his hands a little apart, as if he had only just put down a lyre. His hair was the color of a wheat field at sundown. His eyes, when he looked at her, were the eyes of an animal that has been thinking about her for some time before noticing she is there. He did not bow. He did not need to. He inclined his head a fraction, with the precise courtesy of a host who has been a host for a long time. "Which?" he said, in a voice she had not heard before and could not have placed by language. "Hello," said Lily, who had been raised in Cokeworth by a mother who had drilled politeness into her under all conditions. He took a step. The step did not move him. He was simply nearer. "Forgive the dramatics," he said. "I do not do this often. I am out of practice. I have been told my hair is on fire. Is my hair on fire?" "A little," Lily said. "That is a relief. It used to do that constantly. It would singe doorways. People got tired of it. I have been working on it." He smiled. The smile did briefly what the lightning had done to the carving outside. "I have been watching you climb my hill, Lily Evans. I am here on a ministry, I know. All right. You climb my hill very well. Thank you. You climb it pregnant and you do not say." She did not answer. She did not move. "Forgive me," he said. "It is a small matter. I notice things in my own house. I am here because I am here. I am here because I have been watching all of you, and you in particular, for some time. I have been watching the witch with the brightest aura I have seen in a generation walk up my hill in a thunderstorm, and I have been—" He paused, with the air of a man choosing a word that would not give offense. "Interested. I am married. I know that too." He did not say it lightly. He said it the way an older man says a young man's name. "I am not here for that. I am not asking that. Please, may I sit?" There was nowhere to sit. There was, when he spoke, somewhere to sit. He sat. He did not sit on the bench he had made. He sat on the temple step with his elbows on his knees, the way she had seen herdsmen sit lower down the slope. "My name is many," he said. "My name is also Apollo." She had been waiting for him to say that. She had not been waiting for the small soft thud the word made when it was said by him in his own house to her face. "All right," she said. He looked at her with what she would later understand was a kind of fondness. "You say all right when you are afraid." "I do," she said. "I learned it from my husband. I know him too. He is a good man. He is a brave man. He is going to die very young. I am sorry to be the one to tell you." She did not move. "I am sorry to be the one to tell you," he said again. "I would not ordinarily. I'm out of my office. The fates do not gossip with me. They have on this matter made an exception. There is a man in your country, a young one, who has begun to learn things he should not have learned. He will in time kill your husband. He will in time kill you. He will try to kill the boy you carry. The fates have shown me his face. I do not know him." "Stop," she said. "I will in a moment. Stop now." He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, and there was no theater in the look. And she had the distinct, dreaming sense that he was a much younger man than he had pretended to be a moment ago, and a much older one. He was looking at her the way her father had once looked at her over the top of his evening paper in the year before he died, when he had not known she had come into the room. "There is something I can give the boy," he said, quietly. "It is not strictly allowed. It is not strictly forbidden. It is a gift my brother does not like me to give. He thinks they cheapen us, gifts of this kind. He is, in this, mistaken. They are the only thing about us in the end that does not. Do you understand? Number, of course not. Lily Evans, listen to me. The child you carry is, at this moment, a witch's child and the child of a brave, good young man who is going to die. I cannot save the brave, good young man. I am sorry. I would if I could. The fates do not let me. The child is a different matter. The child is not yet what the child will be. The child can be made a little mine, not in the body. The body is your husband's. The body will be his father's image. You will see, when he is born, that he has his father's hair. The blessing is in the soul. It is in the magic. It is in the warmth your husband will feel when he holds him and not know what he is feeling. It is the difference on a particular night between the curse striking and the curse turning. I cannot promise his father's life. I cannot promise yours. I can promise his. Why? Because the fates showed me your face, which. Why? Because I have been watching you climb my hill." She closed her eyes. The temple round her was very bright. The man on the step had moved or had not moved. He was now closer. He had not touched her. He would not, she understood, touch her. He was waiting. "I cannot tell James," she said after some time. "No," Apollo said, "you cannot. I am sorry. He will never know. He will love the boy. He will not know why. I think, and I have known many fathers, that he will not need to know why. And the boy will know. I will see to it, not at once, when he is ready. I am not without parts." She opened her eyes. "Show me." He showed her. There was a vision, not in pictures so much as in a kind of warmth across her sternum, of a child with hair like sundown and eyes like her own, standing on a tower under stars, with a wand in one hand and a small bow in the other, and a great laughing thing of horses made of light running away from him into the dark. She put her hand on her belly. The thing in her was, at this point, smaller than a fingernail. The thing in her was, at this point, also her son. "All right," she said. "All right," Apollo said back with the gravity of a man receiving a vow. He stood. He held out his hand. He did not again touch her. He held the hand near her shoulder with the careful held distance of a man who knew how much his hands could do. "It is done," he said. The dream began to thin. "He will be funny," Apollo said almost to himself. "I can see that. Witches' sons are often funny. He will be small. He will love early light. Watch him in the geraniums. He will sit in them. He will not know why. I will be in the end not the worst of fathers. I have been worse fathers. I have been better. I will try in this case to be better. James will be his father. Yes. You will not interfere. I will not beyond what I have given. I will speak to him once when he is safe enough to be spoken to. I will give him perhaps one bow. I will not raise him. I am not a man to raise sons. It is not in me. Good. You are sharp, witch. I have been told. It is not a flaw. I have not been told that as often." He laughed. The laugh was the most human thing he had done. "Goodbye, Lily Evans," he said. "I will not see you again. I am sorry for that, too. You have been the best part of my afternoon. I shall remember it. I remember things." The dream went out the way a candle goes out, with a small wet sound. She woke against the lintel. The storm had passed. The sky outside was washed and absurdly blue. There was a fig leaf on her shoulder. There was a pencil still in her hair. There was in the kernel of her body a warmth that had not been there an hour ago and that she would carry without speaking of it for the rest of her life. She wrote in her notebook in the same hurried hand, Day 3. Delphi, storm past, resonance present, no further notes. She tore the previous page out. She folded it small. She put it in her jacket. She walked back down the hill in the new light, and at the bottom, where the road met the village, the German tourist was sitting on a wall with a wet hat in his hand, and he raised his eyebrows at her, and she smiled at him, the tight, pleasant English smile of a woman keeping a secret well, and went on. Hogwarts in October was a building that took its time waking up. The walls were always a little colder in October than they had been in September, and the candles in the corridors burned, by some old grace of the schools, a fraction longer in the morning. Harry, who had been at Hogwarts for 8 weeks, had stopped expecting to be sent home. He had begun to expect instead the small tidal rhythms of the school, porridge at breakfast, owls overhead, the swish of robes round a corner before the wearer of them came round it, the way the staircase from the 2nd floor liked, on Tuesdays, to take him up to the 5th. He had also begun to expect Snape. Snape did not look at him in the corridors. Snape looked through him. The look was specific. It was a look Harry had seen, on the underground at half-term once, on the face of a man who has met an old friend at a funeral, and decided, rather than greet him, to look hard at the wallpaper above his head. It was not a look one used on a child one had never met before. Potions class was, after 8 weeks, a place Harry had learned to be smaller in. He sat in the 2nd row. He did not raise his hand. He stirred clockwise when told to stir clockwise. He did not ever ask about his mother. Snape, at the front, was on his feet behind the desk, with a piece of chalk in one hand and a kind of distaste held lightly in the other. He had been speaking for some minutes about a draft. "Which separates," Snape said, "the witch from the dabbler, the master from the apprentice, and Mr. Finnegan from the merely combustible." A small dutiful laugh from the front bench. "Powdered moonstone. 5 grains. Not 6, Mr. Longbottom. 5. We are not making soup." Harry weighed 5 grains. He poured them in. Snape, who had been moving down the row, stopped at his elbow. He stood there for a count that was longer than was customary. He did not speak. Harry did not look up. Snape's robes were close enough to brush the side of Harry's hand. The smell of the dungeons in October was peat and old iron and faintly lavender, which was the herb on the rack above their heads. "Potter." "Yes, sir." "Look at me." He looked up. The professor of potions had a face that did not, ordinarily, do anything. The face was, at this moment, doing something. It was doing something very small and very controlled. And Harry, who had spent his life reading faces in order to keep ahead of his uncles, recognized it. It was the face of a man who has, against his expectation and against his consent, been shown a thing he has been told for years did not exist. The professor's mouth did not move. The professor's eyes, which were black as lake water, went over Harry's hairline and his temple and the soft place under his ear, and round to the corner of his eye, and then, with a small private violence, away. The professor stepped back. "5 grains," he said to the room. "Mr. Potter has, against the precedent of his house, weighed 5. Continue." He moved on. He did not stop at any other cauldron. He went to the front of the room. He sat at his desk. He put down the chalk. He did not pick it up again for the rest of the lesson. Hermione, beside Harry, who had been watching with the slow blink of a girl filing a thing for later, leaned across the cauldron and breathed, "Actually, that was very strange." "Yes." He paled. "Yes. He recognizes something about you." "Yes." "From where?" "I don't know." She gave him the long, thoughtful look she had begun, recently, to give him, and said nothing more, and they finished the draft. And the draft was a respectable plum color. And Snape, when they bottled it and brought it forward, took the bottle from Harry's hand without looking at him, set it on the rack, and turned away. Outside, in the corridor, when they were free of the door, Ron, who had been 3 benches back, said in a voice that was not as low as he thought, "Bloody hell, what did you do to him?" "I don't know." "He looked like he saw. I don't know what he looked like. He looked like Mum looked when Bill brought home a girl with a tattoo." Hermione said, "Ron." "What?" Indoor voices. "Sorry." They went up out of the dungeons. The October light in the high corridor came in white through the windows and lay across the flags in long, patient rectangles, and Harry, who had not put his hand into a sunbeam since the platform, walked through the rectangles, and where he passed through them they were, for the half-second of his passing, a fraction warmer in his eye than they had been before he came through. Hermione watched. She did not say anything. She watched. The library was the size of a small county, and had been organized by a woman who, in the 17th century, had not approved of anyone reading anything she had not approved of first. The system she had left behind worked on the assumption that books were, broadly, dangerous. It was, in this, broadly correct. Hermione found Harry at a corner table in the folklore section 3 nights later. She put a book down on the table in front of him with the quiet thump of evidence. "Actually," she said, sitting down opposite him, "I have been reading." "All right. There is a passage in here," she said, opening the book without preamble, in Bagshot, footnote on page 211, which references, "I will not bore you," a category of conjuration not properly Patronus and not properly summoning, called in the older texts a theurgic Patronus. That is to say, a Patronus made not by the caster but through the caster, by an external source. It is, Harry, do not interrupt, listed 3 times in the canon. Once in the 11th century, at a battle near Tours, where a Frankish witch is said to have summoned a horse of fire that drove off a host of inferi. Once in 1543, in the journals of an Italian abbess who saw, in the chapel during plague, a wheeled chariot of light, which she took for the angel of the prophet Elias and which my best reading suggests was something else. And once in 1903, in a wand shop in London, in the hand of a customer Mr. Ollivander declined in his book to name. "Right," Harry said. "Harry, I am not finished." "All right. Theurgic patronuses are not technically banned. They are technically impossible. The textbooks list the theurgic patronus as a category of Patronus, the way they list the basilisk's gaze as a category of medical condition. That is, as a thing one ought to be aware of, in order not to be it." She leaned forward. The lamp over the table caught the soft frizz of her hair and gave it, for a beat, an underlit halo, which Harry, who had not thought of Hermione as luminous before, was filing away as an item for the box in his head. Harry, the chariot on the train was a theurgic patronus. All right, which means it was made through you, not by you. The light, the four horses, the absent driver, it was a borrowing of something the spell pulled down through you because you opened the channel, which you did because you said mum, which is, I do not have the theology for this, Harry, but I suspect on the basis of the abbess's journal that the spell answered because something on the other end of it answered. On the other end of what? That, said Hermione, is the question. He looked at her. She looked at him. Round them the library was making the sounds the library made. The creak of old shelving, the small whisk of pages turning themselves in the restricted section, somewhere far off the patient cough of the librarian working through the evening. He said very quietly, "I had a dream last night." "What kind of dream?" "There was a man. I did not see his face. He was sitting on a step. There was an instrument, I do not know the word, with strings. He was holding it. He was not playing it. He looked up at me. He said, 'Hello, you,' he said." Harry stopped. He shook his head. "He said, 'You have your mother's eyes.' I did not know how to answer. I woke up." Hermione was, by this point, leaning so far across the table that the book was under her elbows. "Has anyone," she said with great precision, "ever told you have your mother's eyes?" Hagrid said it once. "Apart from Hagrid, in your dreams." "Number right." She sat back. She put her hands flat on the table. She did not look afraid. She looked faintly, the way she had looked the first time she had managed a charmed spell that had not been on the syllabus. "Right, Harry. We are going to be careful, and we are going to be quiet, and we are going to read. All right. And Ron is not to know, yet he worries. All right. And neither," she said, "is Snape. Number." She gathered the book. She put it under her arm. She looked at his hair, which was lying on his forehead in the lamplight in a way that she was going to make a point of not looking at, and she stood up, and she went out of the library at her customary pace, which was the pace of a person not running. Harry sat for some minutes more. He turned his hand, palm up, in the lamplight. The light on his palm was the ordinary warm light of a lamp. He turned it down again. Outside the library window, the moon had come up a great pale half. He could see, from where he sat, 4 stars he should not have been able to see, given the lamp on the table and the closeness of the moon. He had not told Hermione that. He did not yet know why he had not. He went to bed. He did not dream of the man with the lyre. He dreamed instead of his mother, who was sitting on the kitchen step at number 4 with her hair loose round her shoulders and her hand on her stomach. And she was, in the dream, very young, and she was looking at the morning, and she did not turn her head when he came up beside her, but she said, in her own real voice, "Stay close to your friends, love. They are the right ones, I have looked." He woke before dawn. He sat in the window of the dormitory, with his knees drawn up under his chin, until the first light came up over the forbidden forest and lay on him like a blanket. 2 floors up, in a room at the top of a tower that was not, on most days, accessible to most people, 2 old people were having a conversation neither of them was enjoying. "He is 11. I know how old he is, headmaster. He is 11, and he conjured a chariot of horses on the Hogwarts Express, in the carriage in November against a dementor, without instruction, without practice, having said only one word, which was the word mum. I am aware. And the word mum, Minerva, is not the incantation. I am aware of that as well. Dumbledore, who had been at the window with his hands behind his back, turned. The light from the moon was on the lenses of his glasses. He had been the head master of this school for 33 years. He had been alive for considerably longer. He had, in those years, seen most things that a head master of Hogwarts would expect to see. He had also seen a number of things a head master of Hogwarts would not ordinarily expect to see, including on one memorable evening in 1947, a thing which he had not since mentioned to anyone. He said, "We have been visited, Minerva, visited by something older than this castle." McGonagall, who had been standing by the desk with her hand on the back of a chair, sat down in the chair. She did not ordinarily sit when not invited. She had decided in the last sentence that she required the chair more than she required the etiquette. Older than the castle, she said. Yes, Albus, the castle was founded in the late 10th century. I am aware of when the castle was founded. I have read about it. I have at 1 or 2 points been mistaken for one of the founders. Albus. I am being playful, Minerva. It is a coping strategy. Bear with me. She bore with him. I do not know, he said more gently, what we are looking at. I have a guess. The guess is older than I am comfortable airing. The guess will require, before I air it, a quiet visit to a librarian I know in a country where the libraries are kept by men who do not write things down. I will go on the next moonless night. I will be back in 3 days. In the meantime, Minerva, our 11-year-old will go on with his lessons. He will sit through potions with a man who, I gather, has been spending a great deal of his evenings staring at the wall. He will sit through astronomy with a Professor Sinistra who will remark, at some point, that the constellations have begun to lean in his direction. He will read with Miss Granger a number of books which Miss Granger will not have signed for. He will be, on the whole, fine. Fine. He has been, on the whole, fine for 11 years, Minerva, in conditions that would have ruined a number of grown wizards. I do not say it without irony. I have a great deal to answer for in the matter of how he was raised. I will answer for it in time. I will not today. She did not respond. She looked instead at the desk lamp, and her face in the lamp was very tired. And Severus, she said. Severus, said Dumbledore, has been told a great many things in his life. He has not been told this. He will work it out. He works most things out. He is, in this matter, going to be unhelpful for some weeks, and then he is going to be, in his way, very helpful indeed. He is not the friend the boy wants. He is, however, the friend the boy will need. He will hate it. He will hate it the way Severus hates things he intends to do anyway. She permitted herself at this the smallest dry sound. Dumbledore turned back to the window. The moon, half full, was running on the lake. Somewhere in the grounds an owl was mobbing something. The astronomy tower on his right was a pale finger against the dark. He stood looking at it for a long time. His hands, behind his back, did not come together. Minerva, he said after a while, have you ever in your studies encountered the word theurgy? Once or twice. I think we are going to be encountering it more. I had begun, she said, to suspect. Yes. He did not turn. Go to bed, Minerva. There is nothing further we can do tonight that we have not, by saying it aloud, already done. She rose. She went to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. She did not look back. Albus. Yes. He has her eyes. I am aware. He also has, the rest is not James's. I am aware. Then we are agreed. We are agreed. She went out. The door closed behind her with the soft click of an old latch in a school where, on the whole, the doors closed politely. Dumbledore stood at the window for some time longer. The moon came round another inch. The owl in the grounds gave up. The astronomy tower at last held the moon by one corner of its parapet and held it and let it go. He spoke very quietly to no one in the room with him. He said, "Old friend, if that is who has come, I shall have words for you. I shall have a great many words. I am not a man who is ordinarily lost for words." The room did not answer. After a while he sat down at the desk. He picked up a pen. He wrote on a piece of paper a single name in a hand that did not shake. He folded the paper. He put it in a drawer. He did not look at it again that night. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The centaur at the gate. The thing about the forbidden forest Hagrid had told Harry on the second of their walks was that it did not, properly speaking, mind anyone. It was a forest, and it was old, and the things in it were old, and the things in it that were not old at all knew enough of the things that were to comport themselves as if they were. The forest, he said, was not unfriendly. It was simply elsewhere. You walked into the forest the way you walked into another country, with your passport in order, your accent corrected, and a basket of small, thoughtful gifts. Hagrid, who had not been raised to phrase things this way, was, that afternoon, doing his level best. He had been told to phrase things this way. Dumbledore had told him. Dumbledore had not told him to whom he was to phrase things this way, only that he was, on the morning of the 11th of November, at the 11th hour exactly, to be at the western edge of the trees with a coat on and his hands washed. The 11th of November dawned cold. The grass between the castle and the trees was rimed white. Hagrid stood with his coat on and his hands washed, and his beard down his front, and the breath of him made a small private cloud round his head. He did not have to wait long. What came out of the forest was a horse, and what came out of the forest was not a horse. The forequarters of a man came forward through the last of the saplings, and behind the man's waist the body of a chestnut mare followed at the man's pace, and what stepped, all at once, onto the rimed grass was a centaur, but a centaur unlike the centaurs of the forest, who were taut and edgy and wary as deer. This centaur had the body of an animal that had been kept in good pasture and had not been startled in some centuries. His mane and tail had been brushed. He wore across his man's chest a green wool jacket of an academic cut. He carried in his man's hand a leather satchel, and over his shoulder in a leather quiver a single arrow. He was older than Hagrid in the eyes. Hagrid noticed this. Hagrid was not a man who often noticed someone older than him. "Mr. Hagrid," said the centaur. He had a voice that had been trained to project to large rooms over long years, and that, in the open air, came across the frost very clearly indeed. "Forgive my entry on your land. Albus and I had agreed an hour. The hour, by my own old watch, has just been struck." "It has," said Hagrid, who had been told there would be a centaur and who had not been told there would be this centaur. "My name is Chiron. I'm a master of horses. I'm also in another country than this one, a teacher of young men and women who, by accident of birth, are not entirely men and women. I have come on the invitation of your headmaster. He has graciously granted me an hour. He's graceful that way. He is. I have known him since he was a young one, and a fine young one he was. May I be presented by your good offices to the boy?" "Ye may." Hagrid hesitated. He coughed. "He's he's not well told. I am here to tell him." "Right. He will be, I expect, surprised. He's used to it. That is a very sad thing to say of a child, Mr. Hagrid." "I know it is." The two of them stood on the grass for a count of 3. The centaur, who was, on close inspection, not so very large in the body as Harry's first sight of him would suggest, lowered his head a little in the small civil bow of a man who has been received properly. Hagrid, not certain what to do, returned the gesture with rather too much shoulder. He turned. He led the way up to the castle. Harry, who had been told only that he was wanted in the headmaster's office, came up the spiral staircase with his hand on the wall and his head full of small, bright, unrelated things. He had been told he was not in trouble. He had not, in his life so far, been not in trouble in a school. He had got, after 8 weeks at Hogwarts, used to it. He had not got, in 11 hours of being told he was not in trouble at this particular call, used to that. He came up onto the landing. The door at the top was open. He went in. There were 3 people in the office. There was Dumbledore, who was at the desk, with his hands folded, looking pleased and a little tired, as if he had just finished a piece of music he had been wanting to hear for a long time. There was McGonagall, who was at the window, with her arms folded across her front. And there, in the middle of the room, with his forequarters resting on the great hearthrug and his hindquarters folded under him in the careful way of a creature who knew the limits of indoor furniture, was a centaur in a green wool jacket, with a leather satchel beside him on the rug, and a quiver with a single arrow leaning against the leg of the desk. Harry stopped in the doorway. He did not step back. He did not step forward. He took in his head a moment to file the centaur in the hollow box, and finding that the box could not at this short notice accommodate him, he set him on top of the box for the time being. "Ah," said Dumbledore. "Harry, come in, mind the rug. The rug is older than I am and has opinions." He came in. He minded the rug. "This," said Dumbledore, "is Chiron." "Hello," said Harry. "Hello, young hero," said Chiron. The centaur turned on his folded legs and rose in one smooth long motion to his full height, which was, in the office, considerable. His head did not touch the ceiling, although it came close. He bowed. The bow was deeper than the bow he had given Hagrid. It was the bow of a man making his first formal greeting to a person he had been sent to meet. Harry did not know how to bow back. He inclined his head. Chiron, who had taught generations of young heroes how to bow, accepted this with the grace of a teacher who knew that the small inclination from a boy who did not know the bow was, in many ways, the better thing. "Sit, please," said Chiron. "I shall not on the rug sit again. The rug, as the headmaster says, has opinions, and they are tolerable to me only the once." Harry sat in one of the deep leather chairs. He felt, briefly, very small. He set his hands in his lap. He did not look at Dumbledore. He looked at Chiron, who was the more interesting of the 2 presences in the room and the more easily looked at. "Harry," said Dumbledore, "I have asked Chiron to come and tell you a thing that he is in a position to tell, and that I on my own am not. I shall sit at the desk. I shall not interrupt. Minerva will not interrupt either, although she will, by the end of it, wish to. I beg her by old friendship to keep her counsel until the centaur is done." "Albus," said McGonagall, "I beg you, Minerva, HMPH. Chiron, the floor is yours." The centaur turned slowly on his hindquarters, until his man's face was angled gently toward the chair where Harry sat. His eyes, on close looking, were brown, with small very fine flecks of gold in the irises, like the gold flecks one sometimes sees in the iris of an old pony that has been loved. "Young hero," he said, "I shall be plain. I have walked from a long way to be plain, and I shall not, by mincing, dishonor the walk. All right. You are, on the side of your mother, a witch's son. You know this. The wand in your trunk knows this. The school under your feet knows this. You are, on the side of your father, a wizard's son. You know this also. The man whose face you have, whom you call your father in your heart, was a wizard and a fine one. Do you know your father's face? Yes. Have you been told you have it? By Hagrid and by Mr. Ollivander, and once by my aunt in a way that was not nice. It is the face. There is no doubt he gave it to you. He gave it to you whole. I have met him in his time. I knew him slightly. He was a good man and a brave one, and he loved your mother very well." Chiron paused. He drew in a breath. He let it out. "Young hero, your father is also another man." Harry did not move. "He is the god whose hill I tread when I tread my own. He is a god of light and of song. His name is Apollo. He is the father of your soul. He is not the father of your face, your hands, your blood, your house. Those are the gift of your father by lawful name. The other thing is a different gift. It came on a particular night, in a particular ruin, in a country that is hot in July. Your mother went up a hill in a thunderstorm on a ministry letter, and she came down it with you in her. And you were, by the time she came down, 2 things instead of 1. He went on. He told Harry what he had been sent to tell. He told him about the witch who had climbed the hill. He told him about the storm. He told him about the temple. He told him about the dream, which he had not, of course, attended. He told it as a thing he had been told. He told him about the bargain, and that it had been a gift, not a sale. He was particular about this. He told him about the rebound of the curse, which had been a thing of the wizarding world, a thing of the mother's love that turned the spell, but that had been, in its turning, helped by an old hand laid lightly on the inside of a baby's chest. That is the one part, Chiron said, in which the Olympian world has, in your life so far, touched you in the body. It is not, I think, the only part in which it has touched you in other ways. The chariot. Yes. On the train. Yes. That was your father's, or more properly, that was your father lending you his. I have known him since he was, by his own standards, a young one. He is not in many ways a careful man. In this matter he has been, by his standards, careful. He did not appear in person. He sent his chariot. He sent it, I think, because he could not bear to lose you on a train, with no one looking, on the night you came to your mother's school. Harry put his hands flat on the arms of the chair. The leather under his palms was cool and old and patient. He looked up at the centaur who had taught Achilles and Asclepius and Heracles and Jason and a long line of children of gods Harry had never heard of, looked back at him with the grave kindness Harry's last teacher in primary school had reserved for the day she had told him his hamster had died. "I do not," Harry said slowly, "have the words for this, sir. You do not need them today. All right. You will in time. You are clever. Your mother was clever. Your father is clever when he troubles to be. All right. There is a place," Chiron said, "where children of gods are taught. It is not in the ordinary geography on any map. It is in the country of your mother's bargain. It is called Camp Half-Blood. There are children there who have been told what I have told you today in many different ways and at many different ages. They survive it on the whole. They are taught to fight, to think, to speak, to work in groups. They are given at the end of summer a particular bead. Some of them stay all year. Some of them go home in autumn. Some of them, at certain points in their lives, walk into a different country where they meet others like them and where they find a wand in a shop, and where in due course they sit on the rug of a headmaster and listen to an old centaur tell them a thing that, if they are good and brave, they will go on listening to all their lives." "You are inviting me," Harry said. "I am. I do not have to come. You do not. You are not summoned. You are not required. The door is open. The door has been open since the night your mother climbed my master's hill. You may walk through it at any time. You may not ever. You are not reduced in any way by either choice. You are still, in either case, your mother's son. You are still, in either case, the boy who conjured a chariot of light on a train in November because he did not yet know how to be afraid in any other language." McGonagall, at the window, made a small sound which she instantly suppressed. Harry looked at his hands. They were the hands they had always been. Small for his age, the nails bitten down because he had bitten them down at Privet Drive, a thin, pale scar on the back of the right where Dudley had once shut a door on him. They were James Potter's hands. They were also, in some way he had not before now had a name for, the hands of a person who had a name he had not been told. "All right," he said. "All right is a good answer," said Chiron gently. "It is not the only answer. It is a good one for today." McGonagall in the end did not interrupt. McGonagall in the end did the better thing, which was to walk to a small side cabinet and fetch a tartan biscuit tin, and put it open on the desk between Dumbledore and the chair where Harry was sitting, and say, in her stern, dry voice, "Eat a biscuit, Mr. Potter. There is nothing in heaven or on earth that is not improved by a shortbread biscuit." He took a biscuit. The biscuit, which was the sort that crumbled, he ate it. The crumbs went, as crumbs do, on the rug. The rug, which had opinions, was nice enough not to express them. After a while, when the tin had been passed round, and Chiron had, with the gravity of a man taking communion, taken one biscuit and eaten it whole, Dumbledore, who had been silent, set his cup down on the desk and folded his fingers under his beard. "I should like, Chiron," he said, "if you do not mind, to have a word with you in private before you return through the trees." "I expected as much, headmaster." "Harry, Minerva." "If you would, 20 minutes. I shall send Harry an owl when we are done. In the interim, Minerva, I should be much obliged if you would walk Harry to the dining hall for tea, and on the way explain to him, with the terseness that is your gift, what theurgy is, since I gather he is going to be hearing the word from his own friends rather a lot in the coming weeks." Albus. "Minerva, very well." She held the door for Harry. "Mr. Potter, Professor." He went out. He went down the spiral stair. He had a faint sense, on the stair, of being lighter than he had been on the way up, although he had eaten a biscuit, and although he had gained, on the way up, a centaur and a god and the better part of a country. The conversation that followed in the headmaster's office was conducted on Anchor A. Dumbledore poured wine. Chiron declined. Dumbledore set the bottle aside. "You came late," Dumbledore said. "I came when I was permitted." "He is 11. He has been 11 for some months. The treaty has its periods. I have observed them. The first window opened in late October. I came on the first day of November. The hour was set for the 11th by the conventions of your office. I have been in every respect courteous. You have. I have not enjoyed it. I am aware. He has been raised, Albus, in a house I would not put a foal in for a week. I am aware of that as well. Then we may perhaps dispense with the formality and address the question." "Very well." Chiron took 2 careful steps. The hearthrug murmured. He stopped. "He is not in the body ours. He is in the soul. The body will follow the wand. The wand has chosen well. He will be a wizard. He will, on the whole, live in your world. We do not contest this. We never have. But he must be told. He has been told. He will visit if he chooses. He will if he chooses not. I cannot, by the terms my master sets, do more for him than I have done today, until he chooses to walk into our country with his own feet. Apollo will visit. Apollo will visit when Apollo visits. I do not give you a date. I would not if I could. He is not a man to be predicted, my master. He has, at this stage, conducted himself with a restraint I would not have credited him with. He has, in the matter of the train, even improved on himself. I would not, however, depend on him for further restraint. If he likes the boy, and he will turn up. I have no objection to him turning up. I have an objection to him turning up unannounced, in a school full of children, in a body that is, by the standards of my school, not safe to be in a room with. He will, I think, be careful. I have known your master, Chiron, since I was a young one. He is many things. Careful is on the spectrum of the things he is on the smaller end. He is older now. He has, Chiron, been older for some time. You are sharp, headmaster. It is not a flaw. The centaur lowered his head a fraction. He had in his life met a great many wizards. He had not in his life met a great many he would, on his own time, sit down with for a glass of wine. He sat down on his folded legs on the hearthrug. He said, after a moment, "You will tell Severus, of course." "I shall. He will not take it well. He will not. Tell him I send my regards. I knew his great-grandfather. He was a thoroughly disagreeable man. I gather it runs." "It does." "Tell him also," said Chiron with the briefest dry crack of a smile, "that there are worse things to be the steward of in a young man's life than the witness of a god." "I shall." "There is one further matter, Albus." "Yes." "There is a young man in your country who is not in the Olympian sense alive. He is also, by the same standards, not dead. There are in the older texts names for what he has done to himself, none of which I shall use here, in the hearing of a rug. I name him, as your boy will eventually have to, in your idiom. He is a wizard who has split himself for fear of dying. The pieces, at the moment, are not all in one country. They are in the matter of the boy in the boy. I have suspected as much. My master's blessing went round it at the appropriate hour. It did not eject it, it could not. It is in the boy's flesh. It is, however, walled. The boy carries it. He does not host it. The wall in time will need to be unmade before the man can be unmade. My master has thought on the matter in his theatrical way. He will, when the hour is right, send an arrow. He has, on this point, spoken with the fates. They have, on this point, declined to speak back. He has interpreted this, with the optimism of his line, as permission. I do not say this to alarm you. I say it because it would be, in my view, dishonorable not to. Thank you. I shall go. The hour was for one, and I have had it. The boy is in good hands. The hands could be better. They are not, by my standards, bad. You are kind. I am old. He rose, he bowed, he went out. Hagrid was, by some prearrangement, on the stair and walked him down. The hour passed. Dumbledore, at the desk, sat for a long time with his hands folded under his beard. Then, after a long time, he reached across the desk for the drawer and took out the folded paper and unfolded it and looked at the name he had written on it the night before. The name was Apollo. He folded the paper. He put it back. He shut the drawer. He said to no one, "Old friend, I shall meet you soon enough on a tower." On the way to tea, McGonagall did not, after all, explain what theurgy was. She walked with Harry along the corridor and round the gallery and down the steps to the second landing, and at the second landing she stopped and turned and put her hand briefly on his shoulder, the way she had on the platform in the rain, and she said, "Mr. Potter, you will be hearing a great many things in the next while. You will also be hearing a great many things people imagine I have said about you, and that I have not said about you, and I shall like to be on record before that begins as having said only the following. You are an 11-year-old boy. Your mother was the brightest student I ever taught. Your father was a fool, and I was very fond of him, and he made a fine man in the end. You may, in your time at this school, be many other things. You will not, while I am alive, be other than that. Yes, Professor." "That is all." "All right," she nodded once. She walked on. He walked beside her. The smell of tea came up the stairwell. Hermione at the table had her wand out and her textbook open and her hair in a state. She had been at the library since 10:30. She had not, by Ron's count, had lunch. Ron was, by this point in the term, used to encouraging her into food the way one encourages an owl into a cage at the end of an exhibition. He had made her a plate. She was ignoring the plate. She looked up when Harry sat down. "Theurgy," she said. "Oh, no," said Ron. Theurgy is a category of intercession in which the source of the magical effect is not, properly, the caster. It is the caster's permission. The caster opens. The other end answers. It was widely written about between the 2nd and the 8th century, very narrowly written about between the 8th and the 17th, and not at all written about thereafter on the very sensible grounds that the relevant parties by the 17th century had stopped talking to wizards. "The relevant parties, Hermione," said Ron. "What? Plate?" "Yes." She ate absently half a chip. "The relevant parties, Harry, are the gods, the Greek ones. There are also some other ones in other systems, but the canonical ones in Western theurgy are the Greek ones. Specifically, hold on, I have a list, specifically the ones Hesiod liked best. Hesiod was Hermione." "Yes. I am going to need," said Harry, "you to slow down, please." She slowed down. She slowed down by approximately 12%. She told him what she had read. She told him, with citations, what theurgy had been and what the specific category of theurgic Patronus had been and which gods in Greek theology had been most associated with the chariot motif. She gave him a list. The list had 4 names on it. She had circled the second name. "Ah," said Harry. "Yes. That was him. That was him. Apollo, Apollo." Ron, who had been trying to follow this and only partially succeeding, said in his usual tone, "Bloody hell. Ron, what? I am saying it. I am committing to it. You're telling me that Harry's other dad is, what, a sun god, and Harry's just been told by an actual centaur, a centaur, Harry, not a Hermione, a centaur that he's got like two dads, one from each shop, and we are sitting here eating chips. We are. Right. There is more. Of course there is more. There is going to be a lot more, Ronald. There is going to be, said Ron with feeling, a lot more chips. That is true. All right. He took a chip. He chewed it. He looked at Harry across the plate. He had, Harry noticed, gone in the course of the conversation, from horrified to, somehow, settled. Ron Weasley, for all that he said bloody hell, was a boy whose family had, for generations, done the sensible thing of having so many people in it that nothing one of them did could be more remarkable than something some other one of them had also done. He had decided while Hermione was talking that this was simply the new thing, and that Harry was simply the one bringing the new thing this week, and that they would, between them, deal with it. He raised his cup of pumpkin juice. "To," he said. "What's his face?" "Apollo, to Apollo. He will be pleased," said Hermione, who did not on most days drink to anyone but who, on this day, raised her own cup. Gods in the older texts like to be remembered. "To Apollo," said Harry, who was not, he found, embarrassed by this, although he ought to have been. They drank pumpkin juice. The hall round them did its hall thing. At a long table at the far end, in the dimmer light of the staff dais, Snape, who had not eaten his soup, was watching them. He was watching them with the patient stillness of a man who had been watching them for a while. He had not in his face anything that could have been read across the room. He had in his hand a fork that he had not yet put to anything. He was not eating because he was working out the answer to a question he had been asking himself, in private, for some weeks. The question, which he would not have phrased to himself in these words, was, what does it mean that I cannot look at the boy without seeing a man whom I have read of and not ever met? He had narrowed the answer. He had, in the course of an evening with a very old book in his own private library, narrowed it further. He had this morning, when an owl had brought a small note in Dumbledore's hand asking him to attend the headmaster's office at 9:30 that evening, narrowed it further still. He looked at Harry across the room. He looked at the way the candlelight on Harry's hair did the thing it did. He looked at the small private warmth that Harry, eating his chips, did not know he was casting. He lowered his eyes. He picked up his fork. He did not in his head say a word he had been trained, since before he had any business being trained, not to say. He thought it instead. He thought it in the privacy of his own skull, with the dry contempt he kept for things that ought to have been impossible, and that on occasion were not. He thought, of course it would be him. Of course, in this life, I would teach the son of two of the people I have spent my life reading about and resenting. Of course it would be lilies and not lilies. Of course it would be a god. Of course it would be that god whose hand I have, in a younger and less self-aware decade, traced in a painting at the British Museum. Of course it would be a god whose signature is in the boy's hairline like a watermark in a banknote. Of course I would be the one in the room to see it. He thought, after a beat, I shall not tell him. He thought after a second beat with the dry clarity that had kept him alive for a long time, I shall of course tell him, not in words, not in sentences, in the only language I have left for these things. He cut his chicken. He ate it. That night after curfew, Harry, who had not been able to sleep, got up, went down by a route that he had been told by Fred Weasley led to a place that would not be checked at midnight, took a side door at the foot of the East Tower and stepped, in his dressing gown and his trainers, onto the gravel path that ran along the inside of the curtain wall to the gates of the school. The night was clear. The moon was a thin sickle. The sky, away from the lights of the castle, was the blackest he had ever seen. The forbidden forest on his left was a long, dark country, with one or two small private lights inside it that he chose to ascribe to fireflies. He walked along the wall. He did not properly mean to step off the path. He stepped off the path. He went, by some old footing he had not known he had, to the line of the trees. He stopped at the line of the trees. He stood. Behind him, on the gravel where he had walked, there was, very faintly, a glittering. He had not noticed it as he walked. He noticed it now. It was as if his shoes had been wet, and the wet had picked up a fine dust, and the fine dust had, in the moonlight, lit. He looked at his shadow. His shadow lay on the grass at the line of the trees. The shadow was the size of his body. The shadow had, all along its outline, a thin, thin rim of warm light, which was not the light of the moon. It was light of another order. It was domestic. It was as if a window of a kitchen far away were looking out at him through his own outline. He stood for a while. He raised his hand. The shadow's hand on the grass had a thin gold edge. He lowered the hand. The edge stayed. "All right," he said quietly. He turned. He went back along the wall. He went up by the route Fred had told him about. He went to bed. He did not tell Hermione, not yet, and he did not tell Ron, not yet. He lay on his back in the dormitory under the canopy of his bed, and he watched the slow paling of the high, small window. Outside, far above the castle, on the parapet of the astronomy tower, a man Harry had not yet met sat with one ankle crossed over the other and a lyre on his knee, and looked out across the lake at the line where the dark was, very slowly beginning to thin. He did not play the lyre. He held it. He was waiting, with the patience of a god who had not yet in this life had to wait for very much, to be told he could with propriety go down. Chapter 3, End Chapter 4. The bow and the lyre. The last week of June at Hogwarts had been the kind of week that made the older boys, in the corridors, walk a little more slowly than they otherwise would. Exams had been finished on the Tuesday. The lake had been, on the Wednesday, warm enough to swim in. The grounds, by the Thursday, had been so full of small private parties of fourth years on rugs that the prefects had stopped pretending to disperse them. The school, on its way out of the term, had loosened its collar. The castle was tolerating the children. The children were, at last, tolerating each other. Harry had not slept well. He had not slept well for some days, although he had not, when Hermione asked, told her so. He had, in his trunk at the foot of the bed, a small folded note that had been delivered to him on the morning of his last exam by a barn owl he had not seen before, and that had been written in a hand he had not seen before, and that had said only in a green ink, "Tonight, the tower. 11. I shall not be late. I am, in the matter of arrivals, almost never late." He had not told Hermione because he did not yet know which of the two of them would have been more frightening to tell. He had not told Ron because Ron, the night before, had been told he had failed astronomy by 3/4 of a point and was, in his own description, in mourning. He went up to the tower at 11. He went up by the corridor along the second floor, because the corridor along the second floor on the last night of June was usually empty, and the staircase from the corridor along the second floor led, by a quiet route, to a door that was not properly mapped. He had been told about the door by Fred Weasley, who knew about most doors that were not properly mapped, and who had asked no questions when Harry had asked about this one. He came out of the door onto the parapet. The air was warm. The moon was a sliver. The sky was the blue-black it went, in summer in the north, on nights when the sun, even at midnight, had not entirely conceded. There was a man sitting on the low edge of the parapet, with one ankle crossed over the other and a lyre on his knee. The man was not playing the lyre. The man was holding it. He looked up. He set the lyre down on the stone beside him. He stood. He stretched with the small theater of a tall man getting up from a low seat, and the stretch made the air round him do, for a count of one, the thing the air had done in the carriage on the train, which was to brighten without there being a source for the brightening. "Apologies," said the man, in a voice that was, in waking life, lower and drier than it had been in any of Harry's dreams. "I was practicing my entrance. I do not ordinarily practice. I felt on this occasion that I should make an effort." Harry did not move. "You are smaller than I had pictured," the man said. You are also exactly the size I had pictured. I find this confusing. It is a parental thing. I am, you understand, new to it." Harry did not still move. "Speak, please. I have been told that I dominate the room when I am not interrupted. I should like to be interrupted. Begin." "Are you," Harry said after a moment in the small, steady voice he kept for difficult conversations with adults, "Apollo?" "Yes." "All right." The man laughed. The laugh had 3 notes, of which the third was tender. "Lily Evans's son," he said, "says all right. He says all right when he is afraid. He learned it from his father, James Potter, may the man rest, and from his mother, who said it to me once in a dream, and from the universe, which has been telling him in his life so far, all right, rather more often than it should have. You are not the first person to say all right to me, Harry. You may be, in fact, the most pleasing one. I am, in my own small way, charmed. All right." "Stop." Harry stopped. The man, Apollo, came forward 2 steps, and then, because Harry had not retreated, came no further. He was tall. He was, Harry noted, not as tall as Hagrid. He had, on close inspection, the sort of face Harry had seen in Aunt Petunia's magazines under the headlines for advertisements of expensive shaving cream, except that the magazines, in their honesty, had not done the face justice. He had hair the color of a wheat field at sundown. He had eyes the color of a wheat field at noon. He had on his cheeks and forehead the very faint sheen, like the sheen on a coin, that Harry had seen in the box in his head on the carving above the lintel in his mother's dream. He stood with his hands a little apart, the way he had stood in the dream, as if he had only just put down a lyre. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. Harry did not answer at first. He was, he found, quite busy with not crying. He had not cried in some years. He had, in the months at Hogwarts, given some quiet thought to whether crying was a thing he did any more. He had this evening an answer. He swallowed. The swallowing was, by his own quiet rule, allowed. He looked at the man on the parapet of the tower. He looked at the way the small, impossible brightness round the man did, on closer inspection, run a little along the front of his jacket like a signature. "Yes," Harry said. "I have wanted," said Apollo, "to say it to you in person for 11 years. I have said it to you in dreams. I have said it in dreams to your mother. I have said it to a goose in Athens that once met a witch with eyes much like hers, and that nodded as if it knew. I am pleased to have said it to your face. Thank you. You are welcome." He came a step closer. He did not again touch Harry. He sat gracefully on the low edge of the parapet. He patted the stone beside him with the small, lazy gesture of a man who had been a teacher many lifetimes ago. Harry, who did not know what else to do with his body, sat. The stone was warm. It was a warmth that did not properly belong to the stone. "You will have questions," Apollo said. "I shall, in advance of them, do you the courtesy of preempting some. I am here on this evening because the centaur came, and the centaur came because I sent him, and I sent him because the fates, who are old women I do not in the main like, have informed me that the boy I left in the care of his mother's love is, at this stage, ready to be told a thing or two. I do not ordinarily take instructions from the fates. I have made an exception. The exception is you. You are, in my experience, frequently the exception. All right. I am in advance sorry. About a great many things, about your aunt's house, about the cupboard. I knew about the cupboard. I could not act. There are rules. I was at the time displeased. I composed a verse. I shall not in your hearing recite it. It is not by my own standards my best. All right. You may say something other than all right. I am not sure I have, Harry said, any other words at the moment, sir. Sir, Apollo turned his head. Sir is well, sir is gracious, sir is in this matter more than I deserve. Sir is also in my country a thing one says to a man one does not know. I should like, with your permission, to be called something else. Harry did not answer. Father is perhaps a little soon. Yes, Apollo then will do. All right. Yes. The man drew in a breath. He let it out. The breath on the way out was visible in the air for a count of one and then was not. He looked away from Harry. He looked across the tower to the lake, to the long dark of the forbidden forest beyond it, to the small, clean sliver of the moon. He spoke after a while in the slightly more careful voice he had used when he was thinking through a sentence as he made it. "I shall tell you," he said, "what I told her if you would like." "My mother." "Yes, I would like," he told him. He told it in the way he told most things, which was at length and with parentheticals and with one or two flourishes that Harry was, at first, briefly impatient with, and then gradually charmed by in the small specific way a child is charmed by a parent's particular foolishness. He told it warmly. He told it in places badly. He told it at the right place very quietly. He told the climb up the hill, and the storm, and the temple, and the dream, and the bargain. He told it as a man telling his son how he had met his mother, which, in a very particular sense it was. He stopped at the place where he ought to have stopped. He did not, after the bargain, embellish. He said, "I did not see her again. I was not permitted. I would, if I could, have said goodbye. The fates do not let me. The fates are, you will find in your time, not properly mean. They are old. They have in their long lives learned a kind of cruelty by accident. It is a small mercy I shall, when I see them, not point out." He stopped. He picked up the lyre. He set it on his knee. He did not play it. "I should like," he said after a moment, "to give you a thing before I leave." "All right. I have, on consideration, decided that I shall not give you the thing tonight. I shall instead leave the thing where you may find it when you are, by your own measure, ready for it. The thing is, in case you should be curious, a bow. It is not properly a weapon. It is properly a witness. It will fit your hand only when your hand is fit to fit it. It has been with me on and off for a long time. I have in my own history used it badly more than once. I have in my own history used it well. It will, I think, be better in your hand than in mine. I have on this point taken counsel from the centaur, who is a better judge of these matters than I am. All right. I shall also tell you a thing before I leave. All right. There is something, Apollo said, in a voice that was lower than the voice he had been using, old and broken and very angry in this castle. It has, in part, been here for a long time. It has, in another part, only just begun to come back. It is not a thing I have authority over. I cannot reach inside this place. I have asked. I have, in fact, asked rather more loudly than I am usually permitted. I have been told, number I am, in your hearing, telling you so that you may know that when the time comes, the thing in this castle that hates you because, in part, what is in you came from me. I am sorry on that count. I am not sorry on any other count. I do not ordinarily do sorry well. All right. You will manage it when it comes. All right. You will not be alone. All right. He let out a breath. He put the lyre down on the stone again. He looked at Harry. He had not throughout looked at him directly. He looked at him directly now. The look was steady. The look was the look of a man who had been a father in his time to a great many children he had, on the whole, not done well by, and who was, for the next several minutes, choosing with the discipline of an athlete to do better by this one. He said, "I shall in your life turn up. I shall in your life also not turn up. The proportion of turning up to not turning up will be, by the standards of fathers, mediocre. I am sorry in advance for the not. I am pleased in advance of the up. All right. You will perhaps one day forgive me. All right. You may if you do not tell me to my face. I am told by my sister that this is permitted in the present age, and I am by her account due. All right." He smiled. The smile did briefly what the smile in the dream had done, which was a thing the parapet did not have words for. The lake far below came up an inch in its banks. He stood. He did not embrace Harry. He had been, in dreams and in his sister's reports, told in some detail that he was not yet to embrace Harry. He had, in the course of the evening, found this rule easier to keep than he had been told it would be. He raised his hand, the way he had raised his hand in the temple near to Harry's shoulder, with the careful held distance of a man who knew how much his hand could do. He said, "Goodbye, Harry. I shall see you at some point again. I shall in the meantime be pleased with you. I shall not in the meantime be quiet about it. You will on certain mornings find your hair has done a thing it has not done before. You will on certain afternoons find that you are drier than you should have been in a downpour. These are small. They are your warning. They are your father at home looking up and putting his hand briefly on the picture of you that he keeps on his shelf." "All right," Harry said. "All right is on consideration a good answer. Thank you. You are welcome, my son." The word "my son" in the older Greek warmth, the way Apollo had said it the first time, landed on the tower the way the chariot had landed on the train. Harry, who had been at hand distance from the man for some time without being able to look at him directly, looked at him directly now. He did not speak. He did not, by his own quiet rule, cry. He nodded. The small inclination of the head Chiron had taught him, in the office, was the right form. Apollo, who had spent his life being bowed to by people who did not understand the bow, returned it, the way Chiron had returned it, with the particular dignity of an older man receiving the right form from a younger. He turned. He walked along the parapet. He did not, at the end of it, jump. He stepped off with the small, lazy gesture of a man stepping off a curb and went up. The going up did not look particularly like flight. It looked more like the morning coming up at noon somewhere on the other side of the lake. The tower was full of light for a count of 3. Then the tower was a tower again. The lyre was gone from the stone. The stone was warm where it had been. Harry sat. He sat for some time. After a while the door at the foot of the spiral stair opened and Dumbledore in his dressing gown and his slippers came up and said mildly, "I thought I might find you up here." "Yes, sir. It is a fine night." "Yes, sir. Did he leave you anything?" "He said," Harry said, "he would leave it where I could find it when I was ready." "Ah, I do not know," said Harry, "what that means." "You will in time," said Dumbledore, who had, a great many years ago, also been told a similar sentence by a similar person, and who, in his time, had also worked out what it meant. "In the interim, Harry, I should like to walk you back to your dormitory, and I should like to do so by a long route, and I should like, on the way, not to talk." "Yes, sir." "Come along." They walked. They went a long way. They did not, in the going, talk. The corridors were empty. The portraits in the dim slept except for one or two, who, on seeing the headmaster pass, raised their painted hands in salute. At the door of the Gryffindor common room, Dumbledore, who was a man who knew a great many passwords, did not give the password. He simply stood. The door, after a count of 1, gave him the courtesy and opened. "Good night, Harry." "Good night, sir." He went in. He went up. He got into bed. He slept that night, the long, uncomplicated sleep of a person who had, during the day, set down a thing he had been carrying for some time. Outside, far above the castle, where the sky thinned at last to morning, a single high cloud took, at the edge of itself briefly, the shape of a bow. Year 5 came in a series of small steps that, only when looked back on, became a stair. By year 2, Hermione had, in her holidays, read everything she could find on the Olympians, and had, on the back of it, started a small private notebook with a green leather cover that she kept under her pillow at school and in her bedside drawer at home. She had, by the 3rd week of year 2, presented Harry in the library with a chart that had, at the top, the names of the 12 Olympians, and under each one the powers they were said in the older texts to confer on or borrow from their particular mortal lines. "This is, of course," she had said, "preliminary. Of course," he had said, "there will be revisions. Of course." By year 3, Ron, who had grown 4 inches between his birthday and Christmas, had taken to standing in front of his bed in the dormitory in the morning and complaining, with great seriousness, that he had not asked to be tall, and that he was being inconvenienced by his ankles. He had also, in year 3, started in the evenings, sitting beside Harry on the windowsill of the common room with a chess set between them, and had played in some of those games badly in order to give Harry, who had had a bad week at the time, the rare gift of a Ron Weasley loss. By year 4, Hermione had, in her own quiet way, named all 4 of Harry's gold horses. The names were Greek, and were taken from a passage in Pindar she had translated herself with a borrowed lexicon, and Harry, who had not asked her to do this, kept the list folded in the back of a defense textbook, not because he believed the names, but because Hermione had given them to him on a Tuesday in the library with the note, "These will do until you find better ones." By year 5, Harry had in his trunk a small unstrung bow. He had found it at the bottom of his trunk on the morning of his 15th birthday. He had not put it there. He had not asked anybody if they had put it there. He had sat for a long time on the floor of the dormitory with the unstrung bow across his knees, and the wood of it had been warm under his hand in the way the holly of his wand had been warm under his hand in Mr. Ollivander's shop. He had, after a while, put the bow back in the trunk and shut the trunk and gone down to breakfast, and not told anyone for 2 weeks. He had told Hermione in the end. Hermione had in private found him a place. The place was a long disused practice yard at the back of the school where the older Aurors had, in the interwar years, trained the younger, and where, by the time Harry knew about it, only the dust on the back wall remembered any of it. The yard had a single wooden target, 30 paces long, with a circle painted on it in faded paint, and Harry, in the small hours of certain mornings, when the school was quiet and Ron was asleep with 1 foot out of his curtain, had taken his bow into the yard and had slowly taught his hand the bow. The arrows, when he knocked, formed in his hand. The arrows were of light. They did not last beyond the flight. He had asked Hermione, after the 3rd such session, what she thought. Hermione had said in her formal vocabulary, "Harry, on the precedent of the 7th century Frankish witch whom Bagshot mentions in her footnote, I should not, at this stage, draw conclusions. I should observe. We will in a year have more data." He had observed. By the 5th week of year 5, his hand was, by his own quiet measure, fit to fit the bow. By the 8th week of year 5, the bow strung itself when he picked it up. He had not, in the practice yard, missed the painted circle since the 3rd week. The rest of year 5 was a series of weather reports about the country. The thing in the country had begun to come back. It had begun to come back in small, wet headlines on the front of Hermione's Prophet at breakfast. It had begun to come back in a particular set to Snape's mouth at the staff table, which, by November, was the set of a man who had received, in some small disagreeable post, the news he had been waiting on. It had begun to come back in May of that year, in the death of a fellow student, 2 years older than Harry, in a graveyard in Little Hangleton, in a duel Harry had not, in the event, been there for. He had been there for the news of it. He had been there for the funeral. He had been there also for the briefing in the headmaster's office at which the news was presented to him, plainly, by Dumbledore, and at which he had not, by the headmaster's request, been alone. Hermione had been on his left. Ron had been on his right. Both of them had, throughout, kept their hands on the arms of their chairs, and neither of them had at any point spoken. Both of them had, quietly in the way of best friends, refused to leave him alone in the room with a piece of news that was, by its nature, alonish. After the briefing, they had gone, the 3 of them, by mutual unspoken agreement, to the practice yard. Hermione had sat on a fallen beam. Ron had sat beside her. Harry had, with the slow domesticity of a man putting a kettle on, taken the bow and strung it, and set the line of his shoulder, and put 12 arrows into the circle in a count of 45 seconds. The arrows had held on the target for the count of 2. They had gone out one by one the way candles go out at the end of a service. Ron, after the last one, in the small voice he reserved for the sentences he meant most, said, "Right, well, we'd better get on with it then." "Yes," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. Privet Drive on the 18th of August in the summer between Year 5 and Year 6 had not changed in any of the ways that mattered. The hedges had been trimmed. The pebbles in the drive of number 4 had been raked. The Dursleys had been to the seaside, by way of Cornwall, and had returned with the color of badly done toast. Harry was, that evening, walking with his cousin along the playground at the end of Magnolia Road, because his cousin, who had become, in the course of 3 summers, a person more difficult to bully than to be bullied by, was at this stage of his life choosing to spend his evenings walking near, but not strictly with, his cousin. They had not for some weeks spoken. They had walked the same direction. It was, by their standards, a lot. The street at 9:30 went cold. It went cold from the elbow down. All at once, the way the air had gone cold on Lily Evans's elbows on the path to Delphi. Harry, who had read his mother's notebook in Hermione's translation, recognized the cold with the dryness of a man recognizing his own handwriting. He turned. He took out his wand. Dudley, beside him, who had been about to laugh at something the wireless had said in his head an hour ago, stopped laughing. The laughter went on Dudley, the way it went on most people, which was first out of the mouth and then out of the eyes. Dudley sat down on the curb. Dudley, who had not sat down on a curb in his life, sat down on a curb now. There were 2 of them. They came down the road with the soundless drift of a piece of paper a draft is moving. They were tall and wrong. Their hands at the ends of their sleeves were the hands he had seen on the train, except one of them, the nearer, was reaching now, with the slow, patient outstretch of a thing that had been hungry for a long time. The street round them went gray. The street lamps went out one by one. Mrs. Figg's cat, 3 gardens down, made a sound Harry had not known a cat could make. He raised his wand. He did not, this time, say his mother's name. He said, instead, the spell he had now been taught by McGonagall in the practice yard on a Saturday in June with great formal patience. Expecto Patronum. The street filled with sun. Not the sun of August in Surrey. The sun of August at the top of a hill in Greece, on a path, on the way back down from a temple with a fig leaf on a shoulder. The sun went up the road from Harry's wand, and along the curb where Dudley was sitting, and over the hedges of number 4 and into the gardens beyond, and the street, for a count of 3 seconds, was at noon. The chariot was not new this time. The chariot was the chariot of the train, but better made. The horses were the horses of the train, but had been in the meantime fed. The driver was, again, not there, and was. Harry, who had practiced not looking too hard at the place where the driver stood, did not look too hard. The chariot took 2 steps in midair. The chariot turned. The chariot looked at the dementors. The dementors went the way the dementor on the train had gone. They went backward into nothing the way paper goes into a fire. The hands on the sleeves were the last to go, and the hands on the way out made a small sound that was not properly a sound, and that Harry would, for some time afterward, be careful not to remember in any detail. The chariot did not, this time, immediately disperse. The chariot stood. The horses cropped at a verge of grass that was, where they cropped, briefly green again against the August dust. The driver, whom Harry was not properly looking at, raised, at the place where his hand was, a small careful greeting in Harry's direction. Harry returned it. The chariot at this dispersed the way a sigh disperses. The street lamps, one by one, came back on. Mrs. Figg's cat in Mrs. Figg's garden sat down on a wall and, with the dignity of a cat who has not, on the evidence so far, panicked, set about washing one paw. Number 4 at the end of the road was a normal house with normal hedges. A car, somewhere a street away, started its engine. Harry put his wand down. Dudley, on the curb, looked up at him. "Was that," he said in a voice that had, for the first time in his cousin's hearing, no swagger in it at all, "you?" "Yes." "Was it always you?" "Yes." Dudley turned. He looked at his hands. He looked for a long time at the curb between his shoes. He drew in a breath. He let it out. He nodded once. He did not then get up. He did not then speak again. Harry, after a while, sat down on the curb beside him. The curb was warm. It should not, at 9:30 in the evening, have been warm. He did not, this time, comment on the warmth in his head. He had, by this point in his life, several explanations available. He chose, on this curb beside this cousin, not to go through them. A barn owl came down the road, low and unhurried. It dropped on the small piece of pavement between them a folded piece of parchment in green ink. The owl, after this, banked and went away over the roofs. Harry picked up the parchment. He unfolded it. There were 3 words on it in the same hand as the note before. The note read, "Steady, my son." He folded the parchment again. He put it in his pocket. He stood up. He held out his hand. Dudley, after a moment that was long enough to be a sentence in Dudley's life, took the hand. He let himself be pulled up. He did not drop the hand at once. He held it briefly, the way a child of 5 holds the hand of an older brother who has, at last, after a quarrel, said hello. They walked back along Magnolia Road together. They did not talk. At the gate of number 4, Dudley stopped and turned and said, in the small, careful voice he had used on the curb, "Don't tell Dad." "All right," Harry said. They went in. The wireless in the front room was playing the light music it played on August evenings. Aunt Petunia in the kitchen was making cocoa. Uncle Vernon, in his armchair, was telling the wireless what was wrong with the country. The hall, when Harry came into it, smelled of nothing in particular, which was, on some nights, the kindest thing Privet Drive could smell of. Harry went up to his room. He put the parchment in the wooden box under the bed, with the green ribbon Hermione had once tied round a list of constellation names, and the photograph Hagrid had given him in his first year of his mother sitting on a stile. He shut the box. He did not, that night, tell anyone in the house anything. In the morning, at 5:30, he sat at his window and watched the dawn come up over Magnolia Crescent, and his hair, in the light, did faintly the thing it sometimes did. He let it. He had, by this point in his life, given up the small private project of pretending it did not. Outside, far above the road, a high thin cloud came briefly across the disk of the rising sun, and bent before it broke into a shape that was, for the count of one breath, a small, rather pleased curve. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The council of bright things, the council of the gods, when it sat in the hall above the cloud line, on the high seat of the mountain that did not, in the small print of the country, exist. The ceiling was of the morning. The floor was of the evening. The seats were 12, and were each, in their carving, the seat of the god who sat in them. Apollo's was, by his own design, slightly higher than was strictly fair, in the manner of younger brothers everywhere. He came in late. He did not come in late by accident. He came in late on purpose. He had been told by his sister that one ought not to come in late on purpose, on the grounds that one's father, who was the chair of the meeting, had been known to throw lightning at people who came in late on purpose. He had answered his sister in the corridor with the line he had been refining for an hour, which was that lightning was, in his case, easily intercepted on account of his being made in part of the same. Artemis had not laughed. The hall was full. Zeus, in the chair with his hand under his beard, was not pleased. Hera, on his right, with her hands folded in her lap, was, by the small line of her mouth, also not pleased, though, it should be said, by a different knot. Athena, in her seat across the floor, had her chin on her fist and her eyes on the door, and the eyes, when Apollo came in, sharpened to a point. Ares had his boots on the back of the seat in front of him. Hermes had a piece of thread between his fingers and was, idly, tying knots in it. Aphrodite, near the door, raised one eyebrow at Apollo as he passed, and the eyebrow, if read in the original, said, in 3 syllables, "You are an idiot, and I am very fond of you." Apollo sat. The mountain settled. Zeus opened the meeting in the way Zeus opened all meetings, which was without preliminaries. You wanted a hearing, Phoebus. I did, brother. You wanted it 300 years ago and were told number. I am not a man, brother, who declines to wait for a yes. Speak. He spoke. He had been working in his way on the speech for some weeks. He had revised it in his way at the last minute on the way up after his sister's silence in the corridor. He had decided on the way up that the speech was to do on this occasion the unusual thing of being short. There is, he said, a boy. He is a witch's son, in the country of the witches, in the part of the country where my own old cousins rolled out the rules and went away and let the witches make their own. He is, in the soul, a son of mine. He is, in the body, the son of a man I never met, who is dead and who was loved. The boy is, at this moment, 15 years of age. He is at school. He is being hunted by a thing that has, in the country of the witches, made itself into something that no longer dies properly. The thing is not, by any of the agreements we have signed in this room, our affair. I am not asking you to make it our affair. I am asking permission on a single occasion to give the boy a single arrow. Hall was for a count of 3 still. Hera spoke first. A single arrow. Yes. From you? Yes. To a witch's son, to my son. He is a witch's son, he is on the witches' rolls, he is in the witches' school. The witches do not ask us to interfere. The witches have not asked in our memory for any of us to interfere in any of their matters. They have on the whole done very well by being left alone. Yes, Apollo said. I am aware. I am asking in the present matter an exception. You are always asking exceptions, Phoebus. I am aware of that as well. Athena set her chin on her other hand. She had in her own private library 3 books on witches. She had read in the last fortnight all 3. She said in her cool, dry voice, "May I ask, brother, what the boy will do with the arrow?" "He will," Apollo said, "shoot a man with it." "In what sense a man?" "In the sense that the body is a man's and the soul, by the standards of the body, is a man's, although the man has in his own way done some interesting things to it." "How interesting?" "He has split it. He has put the splits in objects. He has put one of them in the boy." "Ah," said Athena. "He has Frankensteined himself." "He has," Apollo said, with the small dry pleasure of a brother getting to use his sister's word, "Frankensteined himself. That is not properly the verb." "It will do." Hermes in the corner cut his thread. He held up the 2 pieces. "Apollo, the witches have a wand for this work. Use the wand. Their wand is on this matter theirs. The wand is not in the matter of the arrow sufficient. The arrow is in the matter of the splits the right tool. The wand is for the man. The arrow is for the part of the man that is in the boy. They will in the moment do their separate work." "How do you know?" "I have read, brother." "I have read and I have asked. I have asked in particular the centaur, who is not on these matters the worst authority. The centaur is alive. The centaur is always alive." I had wondered. Zeus had throughout been listening. Zeus was not on most matters the listener of the family. On certain matters, however, Zeus was, in the privacy of his beard, careful. He was being careful now. He said eventually, "The boy is your son." "In the part of the soul that is mine, yes." "In the body?" "In the body, number the body is the husband's. The husband is dead. The boy carries the husband's face and the husband's house and the husband's name. You will not interfere with the body." "I shall not. You will give 1 arrow and 1 arrow only, not 2, not 3, not a quiver, 1. The arrow will, by your own undertaking, be used on the part of the soul of the man that is in the boy. It will not be used on the man. The man, by treaty, by custom, by long agreement in this room, is the witches to dispose of." "Yes, brother. You will not appear on the day." "I shall not appear on the day." "You will not in any way raise a hand on the day." "I shall not raise a hand." "You will, if you like, raise a horn." "Brother, that is a joke, Phoebus." "It is not the worst one I have made today. It is, in fact, brother, the funnier of the 2. You see, this is what your sisters say I am incapable of. Go on." "The arrow is granted." "The arrow is granted." There was a soft hum round the hall, the kind of hum a room makes when the difficult vote has gone the way of the speaker, and the room as one exhales. Hera alone did not exhale. Hera alone was looking at Apollo with the particular dry interest of a stepmother who had been waiting for some time to ask a private question. She said, "Phoebus." "Yes, sister. You said earlier, my son." "I did. You meant it." "I did." She did not ordinarily smile at him. She smiled at him now, the small, sharp smile of a woman who had, in her time, been many things to a great many sons not her own, and who knew in the smile several things he had not in his speech said. "Be careful," she said. "Sister, I am, in the matter of the boy, the most careful man I have been in 3,000 years. That is not, Phoebus, an especially high bar. It is on the bar a record." "Go," said Zeus, with the small, short movement of his hand that meant, in the family, you have what you came for. "Leave before I change my mind." Apollo went. He went along the corridor of the morning. He went down the steps of the evening. At the door of the hall his sister was waiting for him. She was leaning on the lintel with her bow on her shoulder. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She simply, when he came past her, put her hand on his arm, and did not let go for a count of 3, and let go, and watched him walk away into the cloud line with the steady straight back of a brother whom she had, on this single day, been proud of. The Black House, at 12 Grimmauld Place, was, by mid-September of year 6, the headquarters of an order that had, in the months since the events of the previous June, grown by approximately 14 people. Some of the 14 were friends of friends. Some of the 14 were former students of the headmaster. Some of the 14 were goblins. One was a centaur, although by previous arrangement the centaur did not, when he came, come in. Hermione had taken by mid-September the second-best armchair in the front parlor, and had on the small table beside it a teetering pile of books in 7 different languages, a silver pen, a notebook with a green leather cover, and a saucer of biscuits on which she had, at any given moment, 2 biscuits, neither of which she ever ate. Ron had, by mid-September, eaten the biscuits. Harry, by mid-September, had taken to standing by the front window, with his hands in his pockets, and looking down into the small black square, and listening with one ear to the conversation of the room behind him, and with the other ear to the small clean note of a string instrument that, on certain afternoons, he could hear faintly from the other side of the curtain, the way a person on the seafront hears, faintly, a piano in a hotel half a mile inland. The order had been told for some time what was needed. The order had been told for some time what was at stake. The order had not, until that Sunday afternoon, been told what Harry was going to do on the day and how he was going to do it. He had decided with Hermione that the morning's conversation was to be the one in which they were told. Hermione, on the second-best armchair, had been speaking for 35 minutes. She had, in the course of those 35 minutes, used the word Horcrux 19 times. She had used the word fragment 11 times. She had used the word theurgy 3 times. She had used the word arrow once, and only once in the last sentence of the last paragraph of her brief, with the formal tidiness of a barrister coming to the point only when the brief was, on every other axis, complete. Mrs. Weasley by the door had cried twice. She had been cried for twice. Lupin, on the long sofa, had set down his cup and not picked it up again. Mad-Eye, near the fire, had throughout not blinked, on the eye one would have expected him not to blink with. When Hermione finished, the room was quiet. "There are," she said in the small, dry voice she used at the end of briefs, "questions." Lupin spoke first. "Harry." "Yes." "You say there is a fragment in you. You mean a fragment of him?" "Yes." "You have all this time been carrying it?" "Yes." "How long have you known?" 2 years, and we have not been told. We have been working on it. There has, in the working, not been a useful day to tell." "There is today." "There is today." Lupin set down his hand on the arm of the sofa. He was not a young man any more. He had not, by his own standards, been a young man for a long time. He looked at Harry across the room. He looked at him for a count of 4. He nodded once the way men of his sort nodded when they had decided a thing. "All right," he said. "All right," Harry said back. Mrs. Weasley by the door said, in the small, wet voice she had been using, "And the arrow." "The arrow," Hermione said in her formal vocabulary, "is, by all the indications we have, a one-shot intervention by Harry's other father with the express and limited purpose of severing the fragment from the host. Once severed, the fragment becomes, in the older theological literature, a separated piece. It is no longer in Harry. The man who made it is, by the destruction of the other fragments and by the loss of this one, reducible. The wand is for the reducing. The arrow is for the severing. The two are, in our reading, separable. The two must on the day occur within minutes of each other." "Minutes? Yes. Why?" "Because," said Harry, who had not until that moment spoken in his own voice in the room, "if I leave him with the fragment severed and the body intact, he will in some other vessel find another way. If I leave him with the body intact and the fragment in me, he is, in the country, immortal. The two are a sequence. The arrow first, the wand second. We do them inside the count of 2 minutes. Who fires the arrow? I do. Who casts the wand? I do. Who is at your side? Ron, Hermione, anyone in this room who is, on the day, on their feet." Mad-Eye, who had been throughout not blinking, made the small dry sound he made when he had something to say and did not ordinarily say it. The eye on the side of his head one expected to swivel, swiveled. He looked at Harry with the eye that had been his since before Harry had been born, and he said, "Boy." "Yes, sir." "You have in your trunk a bow." "Yes, sir." "It is, on the precedent of the texts I have read, not a witch's bow." "No, sir." "Has it been by you used in private?" "Yes, sir." "How private?" "Sir, only Hermione and Ron and McGonagall and the headmaster have seen me draw it." "Good. Keep it that way until the day. On the day you will not let it out of your hand. On the day you will not fire it until you have the man in front of you and you have the line. On the day you will not, for any reason, miss." He paused. He took, with the careful slowness of a soldier his own age, a sip of water. "I have," he said, "in my own life fired an arrow exactly twice. Once in 1949 on a moor in Sutherland, at a thing I shall not in this room name. Once in 1971 in a place I shall not name either. I missed both times, boy." "You will not miss, sir." "Good, that is the briefing. The rest of you ask your questions to Miss Granger. She has, by my count, a better grasp of the bibliography than the headmaster. He is on the matter vain. She is on the matter complete." Hermione in her chair sat very briefly, the very small smile she allowed herself when she was, in a public room, called complete by a man who did not give compliments. The questions went on. They were good questions. They were answered. The afternoon in the front parlor went on into the late evening, and the late evening into the early night, and the small, clean note of the string instrument on the other side of the curtain did not on this evening come. Harry, when the meeting broke up, went into the small, dim back kitchen. He sat at the table. He put his hands on the wood. He did not, for a long time, do anything else. After a while Ron came in. Ron sat opposite him. Ron did not speak. Ron put down in the middle of the table between them a single biscuit he had kept back from Hermione's stash for this exact purpose. They split the biscuit. They ate the halves. They went, when they were done, to bed. Harry, 2 weeks later, was summoned to Snape's office. He went on a Wednesday, after his last lesson, with his bag on his shoulder and his hair, against his own quiet rule, in the particular state it had been in for some weeks, which was the state of a thing that has been looked at, several times in a day, with mild puzzlement, by its own owner. He had, in the year since the funeral, given up the smaller of the 2 private projects. He had not, in the year since the funeral, given up the larger. He knocked. Snape, from inside, said, "Come." He came. Snape was at his desk. He had a single open book on the desk in front of him. He had beside the book a small silver basin Harry had not seen on his desk before. The basin was empty. He did not look up. "Sit, Potter." Harry sat. "You will, for the count of 10, not speak, and you will, for the count of 10, look at the ceiling." Harry looked at the ceiling. The ceiling of Snape's office was the ceiling of any office in the dungeons of Hogwarts. It was, at the top, ribbed in stone. It had a long crack along one edge that had been there as long as anyone living had been in the room. A single small spider in a corner was in the late stages of a web that no one would, for some weeks, sweep down. Harry counted to 10. He looked back down. Snape was looking at him. He was not looking at his hairline. He was looking with the dry, direct stare of a man who had decided to do, on this occasion, the looking that the looking required at his face. The face he was looking at was the face of a 15-year-old boy who had been sitting in his classroom for 4 years. And the face he was looking at was the face of his oldest friend at 15. And the face he was looking at was, at the long edge of the seeing, the face of a thing that had, at the Temple of Delphi, in the dream of his oldest friend, leaned in and put its hand briefly on the inside of an unborn baby's chest. He was looking at 3 faces in one face. He was not at the present moment looking away. He spoke. He spoke without preamble. He did not in his life do contractions. He did not in this conversation intend to start. "Potter," he said, "I have been informed by the headmaster of the circumstances of your conception. I have been informed by the centaur of the circumstances of your survival. I have been informed by Miss Granger of the circumstances of your training. I shall not in this room comment on any of the 3. I shall on the present occasion comment on a 4th thing, which is, by my own count, the only thing in the 4 matters on which I am, in this castle, the appropriate person to comment." "Yes, sir." "Your mother." "Yes, sir. Was in her time at this school, my friend. Yes, sir. You have been told that I disliked her. Yes, sir. You will in your life hear that again. You will in your life hear it from people who saw it from the outside and who were, by their lights, not wrong. They were not, however, on the inside. The inside, Potter, was different. The inside is not, on the present afternoon, my topic. The topic of the present afternoon is that I knew her when she was a child before she was clever, and I knew her again when she was clever, and not yet a witch. I knew her also when she was a witch before she was a wife. I did not know her after she was a wife, because I had at the time made a particular choice, which I have been paying the interest on for some years. The principle of the choice I shall not, in this room, repay. The interest is mine. I shall pay it as long as I am alive, Potter, by, in part, getting you to the day on which the count of 2 minutes is run." He paused. He took a breath. "In the matter of the arrow," he said, "I do not have anything to add. The arrow is your father's, your other father. He is, on the present matter, not my colleague, and I do not pretend to advise him. He has on the matter been advised by a centaur older than this castle. I trust the centaur. I do not, however, trust the bow. Sir, I do not, Potter, distrust the bow either. I distrust the man behind the bow. I have read of him for many years. I have in my time stood in the British Museum with my hand near a painting I did not, while my hand was near it, touch. I have, in my time, in my own private library, traced his signature in the margin of a manuscript I had no business owning. I know him, Potter, the way one knows in the small hours, an author one has read for too long. I do not, on the basis of that knowledge, recommend him as a parent. He is, on the basis of that knowledge, all of the things he is in the older texts. He is also, in the matter of you, by every observation I have made of him in the last 4 years, doing better than the older texts would have led me to expect. Sir, I am giving him credit, Potter. I do not ordinarily give credit. I am giving it because in this room on this afternoon I should like the record to show I gave it. He looked away. He looked briefly at the basin on the desk. He looked back. You will on the day, he said, be in the courtyard. Yes, sir. You will on the day be in the courtyard alone for the count of by my best estimate 11 seconds. Yes, sir. In the 11 seconds I shall by my own arrangements be in a particular place. I shall in that place do a particular thing. The thing I shall do will, by my best estimate, give you the 11 seconds. After the 11 seconds you will have the bow on your back, the wand in your hand, and the man across the courtyard, and you will, on the count of 1 and not before, raise the bow, and on the count of 2 fire. Yes, sir. You will after the firing not look for me. Sir. Potter. Yes, sir. You will not look for me. I shall not after the firing be in a state to be looked for. I have in this room in this conversation said all that I am willing to say on that point. You will not on the day, on any other day, in any conversation with any person, refer to me as a hero. I am not one. I am at most the person who has this afternoon in this room told you the truth about a thing that, on the count of 11 seconds, I shall in the courtyard give you the time to do. Yes, sir. Good. He stood. He did not then sit. He walked with the particular formality he reserved for moments he did not, in his own internal record, wish to be on the record, to the door of his office. He held the door open. He did not look at Harry. He looked instead at the floor of the corridor outside the door. Potter. Yes, sir. Your mother had, on the day she became my friend, asked me in the playground at Cokeworth what I knew about magic. I did not on that day know much. I told her in the manner of small boys more than I knew. She listened in the manner of small girls. She believed of what I said the parts I had got right. She challenged of what I said the parts I had got wrong. I have on the whole in the years since attempted in my professional life to deserve the listening. I have not on the whole attempted to deserve the believing. On the matter of the believing, Potter, I would, if I could, this afternoon have a word with her. I cannot. You will, on the day after the count of 2 minutes, be in a position to have, on my behalf, the word with her instead, sir. That is all, Potter. Get out. Harry got out. He went out into the corridor. He did not, for the count of 3 steps, turn round. After the count of 3 steps he turned round. The door was closed. There was at the foot of the door, in the line of light from the office, the single thin shadow of a man at a desk who had, on the desk, nothing to do at the present moment, and who had, for the count of a long evening, no intention of finding anything to do. He was simply at his desk sitting. Harry walked away. He went up the corridor. He went up the stairs. He went at the top of the stairs to the small disused practice yard at the back of the school. He took out the bow. He did not, that afternoon, fire any arrows. He put the bow on the dirt of the yard, and he sat beside it, and he set by his own count, his hand on the wood the way he had. On the morning he had first set his hand on his wand at Mr. Ollivander's, and he sat in the dirt of the yard for some time in a quiet that was not, by his own measure, unhappy. When he stood up he went to dinner. He sat between Ron and Hermione. He ate. After dinner he went by request to the headmaster's office, and Dumbledore, who had been waiting, did not ask him what Snape had said. Dumbledore, who had been waiting, said instead, "Harry, I should like, if you would permit it, to walk with you for an hour. I have not in some weeks taken the air. I have a small hill at the edge of the grounds in mind." "Yes, sir." "Come along." They walked. It was a clear evening. The lake on their left was a pewter plate. The trees on their right were, at the line where the dark began, the dark country Hagrid had long ago described. Dumbledore did not, on the walk, talk about the day to come. He talked instead about a holiday he had once taken in 1922 in Vienna, and about a coffee shop he had liked, which had by 1939 been bombed, and about the patience of certain old men, which was, he said, in his experience, the patience of children dressed in older bodies, and about a woman he had known briefly in 1924, whom he had not in any subsequent year been able to forget the laugh of. They came to the small hill. They stood at the top. The castle behind them sat in its own stone glow. The forest beyond went on. Above, the sky began in small, thin patches to admit stars. "Harry." "Yes, sir." "You have in your trunk a bow. You have in your wand arm your mother. You have in your wand your phoenix. You have in this castle friends. You have in this hill an old man who is, on the matter, going to do in his own way the small useful thing he has prepared. You have in the corridor outside Snape's office a teacher who has, this afternoon, told you the truth about, in his own words, a count of 11 seconds. You are by my count on the day not in any sense alone." "Yes, sir." "Repeat that for me, would you?" "I am not on the day alone. Once more, I am not on the day alone." "Good." He turned. He set very briefly his hand on Harry's shoulder, the way McGonagall had on the platform, the way Apollo had not on the parapet. The hand, this time, was the hand of an old wizard who had loved a great many people and outlived most of them, and who was, in the present moment, choosing with the same discipline Apollo had chosen to do by this child better. They walked back. Harry went up to bed. He slept that night, not the long, uncomplicated sleep of the night on the tower, but the wakeful, careful sleep of a soldier the night before a march. He dreamed faintly. He dreamed in the dream of a courtyard he had not yet been in, and of a man across the courtyard he had, in the dream, no opinion of, and of his own hand in the dream, in the lattice of light at the moment of knocking, going up by itself, in the way a hand goes up that has been practicing a movement in private for some years. When he woke, it was dawn. He sat for a count of 3 at the window. He did not, that morning, look at his hair in the glass. Outside, somewhere over the lake, a single high cloud at its edge took, briefly, the shape of an arrow. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, The Battle of Hogwarts. The night came on the castle the way bad weather comes on a ship in the open sea, all at once in pieces, with no chance in the doing of it to lash anything down. The first sign was the great bell in the East Tower, which had not been rung in living memory, and which gave out at 28 minutes past 9 in the evening 3 slow, flat tones that did not, on the third, fully end. The second sign was the lights along the curtain wall going dark in sequence, the way the lights of the train carriage had gone dark, except in reverse, from the lakeside round to the gate. The third sign was the small private siren the headmaster had, 2 years ago, had a charms expert from Geneva install in the 7 main staircases, which was a sound like a bow drawn slowly across a single low string. By the time the last note of it had run out, the school was on its feet. Harry, who had been in the small disused practice yard with his bow on his back and his wand in his hand, and the count of 2 minutes, by his own internal metronome, running already, came up the long corridor at the foot of the East Tower with Ron at his right and Hermione at his left, and Neville, who had grown into himself in a way that surprised everybody but Neville, 3 steps behind. They came up at the half-run, the run that did not waste breath. They came up because they had been told, in 73 planning sessions over the last 14 weeks, exactly where they were to come up to. McGonagall met them on the second landing. "Mr. Potter, Professor." "The man," she said in her stern, dry brisk, "is not yet at the gate. He will be at the gate, by my best estimate, in the count of 11 minutes. You will be in the courtyard, by my best estimate, in the count of 7. You will, in the 4 minutes between, do the small, precise thing the headmaster has asked you to do, which is wait. Are we agreed?" "Yes, Professor." "Mr. Weasley." "Yes, Professor. You will not, in the 7 minutes between here and the courtyard, attempt anything brave." "No, Professor." "Miss Granger." "Yes, Professor. You will not, in the 7 minutes between here and the courtyard, correct me on any of the foregoing." "No, Professor." "Mr. Longbottom." "Yes, Professor. You are doing well. Continue." "Yes, Professor." She pivoted. She went, with the small, efficient turn of a woman who had taught the same staircase for 40 years, up the next flight without breaking stride. They went after her. The great hall at the foot of the next staircase was being emptied of students by older students. There was, somewhere in the fourth years, a small pale girl who was crying, and who was being walked by another fourth year briskly through a side door. There was, somewhere in the seventh years, a very tall boy with a piece of bread in his hand who, when he saw Harry pass, raised the bread in a small dry salute that was, by the standards of a seventh year saluting a sixth year, generous. There was, on the high table, no one. The teachers were at their stations. The stations had, by previous arrangement, been chosen. Across the hall, by the side door, Snape, in his black, was standing with his hand on a small leather satchel. He did not look up as Harry passed. He did not, at any point during the next 11 minutes, look up. The looking up was, by his own account, not on his list. The courtyard was the small one between the entrance hall and the bridge, and was, by the standards of courtyards in this castle, intimate. It was paved with the same stone as the first floor. It had at the far end a low parapet, beyond which the bridge ran out across a drop of 200 feet to the bank of the lake. It had on its near side 3 doors. The middle door led back into the entrance hall. The left door led to the kitchens. The right door, which was the door Snape had earlier mentioned by reference to the count of 11 seconds, led to a small set of steps that came up, by a route that was not properly mapped, behind the astronomy tower. Harry came into the courtyard at 16 minutes past 10 in the evening. He came in alone. He had been alone, by previous arrangement, since the foot of the staircase. Ron, behind him, had stopped at the door of the kitchens. Hermione, behind him, had stopped at the door of the entrance hall. They had not, in the parting, said anything. They had not needed to. They had, between them in the last 14 weeks, used up the large words. The walking apart at the courtyard door had been the small, clean, wordless beat of 2 people who had agreed, in advance, not to make a thing of it. The courtyard, when he came into it, was empty. The far parapet, when he reached it, was warm under his hand. He set the bow, in its leather case, against the inside of the parapet. He drew it. He set it on the parapet beside him, with the string laid out along the stone in the small, straight line his own hand had got used to. He took out of the inside pocket of his robe the small, folded note that had been delivered to him on the morning of his 15th birthday by an owl he had not seen before, and that he had since kept folded against his chest. He looked at it. He read the 3 words on it. He folded it again. He put it back. He turned. He set his back to the parapet. He drew his wand. He held the wand in his right hand. He held the bow by the grip in his left. He waited. The count of 4 minutes ran. Voldemort came across the bridge. He came across it the way Apollo had stepped off the parapet, except in reverse, and except with a different intention. He did not, in the coming across, walk. He did not, in the coming across, run. He drifted, by the small degree that gave the impression of progress without the impression of legs, in the long, dark drift of a man who had, in his own life, made of his own body a thing it had not, when it had been a young man's body, been. He had, by the standards of the wizarding world, no nose. He had, by the standards of the wizarding world, no hair. He had, by the standards of the wizarding world, no shadow. The bridge under him, where he passed, did not, where he passed, take his weight. The bridge under him, where he passed, took the weight of an idea which was not the same thing, and the bridge knew it. He came in at the parapet end of the courtyard. He did not come alone. He came with 3 of his clothes. He had not come, by his own count, with all of them. He had not, by his own count, needed to. He had been told, by his own intelligence, that the boy was alone in the courtyard. He had been told this by a man in a black robe with a satchel under his arm, in a room 2 corridors away, in the count of 11 seconds before the man in the black robe had, by his own measure, done a thing he had been preparing, in private, for a number of years. Voldemort came into the courtyard. The 3 with him fanned out, in the way of men trained to fan out, to the doors at the near end. They did not, however, enter the doors. They had been told in the past hour in a voice that brooked no, that the kill of the boy was, on this evening, the master's and the master's alone, and that any man who put his wand into the master's line on the present occasion would, by the master's own preference, lose, in ascending order, his wand, his hand, and his head. The three of them, accordingly, stood at the doors and lowered their wands and watched. Voldemort came forward. He came forward across the small space until he was, by the standards of a duel, in range. He stopped. He looked with the long, careful look he had developed in the years since he had first stopped looking at people the way men look at people, at Harry. He looked at Harry's face. He had been told by his servants of the face, but he had not in his own person seen it in a number of years. The face was, by his own old memory, the man's. The wand arm was the wand arm. The wand was the wand. The eyes were the mother's. The hair was, by his own measure, the father's in the line and in the cowlick, and in the way it lay on the brow. It was also, in a way he had no name for, on fire. It was a fire the candles in the courtyard did not account for. It was a fire the moon, which was in its third quarter, did not account for. It was a fire he had not in his own life, in his own studies, in his own private, very thorough library, ever read of. He looked away from the hair. He looked, with the long, dry stare he had spent 50 years training, at the bow. He had not been told by his servants of the bow. He had been told of the wand. He had been told of the bird and the wand. He had been told of the boy's height, the boy's weight, the boy's shoe size, the boy's reading list. He had been told of the boy's friends and the boy's lessons and the boy's average in the standardized assessments of his country on the topic of defense. He had been told of the boy's dreams on the nights the boy had had useful ones. He had not been told of the bow. He spoke after some time. He spoke in the sibilant, archaic voice he had been for some decades refining. "What," he said, "is in your hand, boy?" Harry did not answer. The wand in his right hand had not been raised. The bow in his left hand had not been raised. He stood with his back against the parapet, with his weight on his back foot, with the small, careful balance Snape had once, in a defense class 4 years ago, told him was, in dueling, the only weight that counted. Voldemort came one step closer. "Boy," Harry did not answer, "you are, by the appearance of you, holding a bow. The bow, by the look of it, is not properly of your country. The bow is also, by the look of it, on you in the act of being held. You will, on the present occasion, set it down. You will, on the present occasion, raise the wand. You will, on the present occasion, look at me, and I shall, on the present occasion, do you the courtesy of looking at you in return. Are we agreed?" Harry did not answer. He raised the wand. The wand in his hand went up by itself, in the way a hand goes up that has been practicing a movement, in private, for some years. The wand in his hand went up by way of the parapet, the wand arm, and the line of the shoulder, and at the top of its arc, in the count of 1, the wand was, against the dark, a small clean point of holly with the 11 inches of phoenix feather inside it singing. Voldemort raised his. The two wands, when they spoke, did the thing wands had not in his own old library been told to do. They put a line of light between them. The line was not properly a line. It was a shaft. The shaft was the color of the small, unhappy memory at the bottom of every person in the courtyard who was not, by his own count, dead. The shaft was, in the middle of its length, alive. The two of them held it. The duel went on for 50 seconds. In the 50 seconds, Harry did not, by his own count, breathe twice. He did not, by his own count, think more than 3 thoughts. The first thought was the thought of the practice yard, and Hermione on the beam and Ron on the beam, and the 12 arrows in the count of 45 seconds. The second thought was the thought of his mother on the kitchen step at number 4, and the small hand on the small stomach, and the 3 words she had said in the dream. The third thought was the thought of Snape, in the office with the door open and the floor of the corridor, and the 3 words he had not in the office said aloud but had said in the room by closing the door at the end. In the 50 seconds, Voldemort, who had been many things, did not by his own count lose. He also did not by his own count win. He held. The boy held. The shaft held. In the 51st second, the line of the man and the line of the boy were even. In the 52nd second, the line moved by a small amount toward the man. In the 53rd second, the man understood without surprise that the boy was, in the shaft, the marginally stronger of the two. In the 54th second, Snape, by previous arrangement in a small room 2 corridors away, did the small precise thing he had told Harry he would do. The thing involved a draft. The thing involved a particular phrase in Old Greek. The thing involved, on the part of the man who did it, an act of the will that had been, for some time, the only act of the will he had, on his own private inventory, left to give. The thing, on the part of Voldemort, was felt as a small, thin tear in the country of his own attention, on the side of his mind that had, for many years, depended for its keeping on a particular fragment of soul, in a particular vessel, in a particular boy. The tear was not, by Voldemort's own count, fatal. The tear was, by Voldemort's own count, distracting. In the moment of the distraction, his line in the shaft dropped by a hand's breadth. In that hand's breadth, Harry, who had for some time been waiting on it, dropped the wand to his side, and with the line of his shoulder shifting on its trained pivot, brought the bow up. He knocked. He had not, in any of the last 14 weeks, told anyone what knocking on this bow looked like. He had not told them because the telling, in any words he had not, on the page, been, by his own measure, accurate. The truth of it was that the bow, when his fingers came to the string, made the arrow. The arrow was in the air between his finger and his thumb, a thin straight line of light. It was not the white light of his Patronus. It was not the gold light of his shadow at the line of the trees. It was the light he had not in his life seen in any other place, and that he had in the ledger of his own private box kept, for some time, the only item and the only entry under the heading of, by his own slow inscription, my father's. He drew. The string came back. The string did not, on any other measure he could give, exist. The string, when he drew it, was the string of his mother's grief in the dream, and the string of Apollo's lyre on the stone of the parapet, and the string of his own old slow practice in the yard at the back of the school, all 3 of them in one string in the count of 1. He fired. The arrow went across the courtyard in less time than the eye, at this distance, was, by training, capable of registering. It went in a line that did not, in any other measure he could give, deviate. It was, by the standards of any of the 7 schools of archery represented in the older texts, the only arrow Harry had ever fired that had been, by his own measure, perfect. It struck Voldemort in the center of the chest, on the line, by old anatomy, of the heart that the man had not for many years used. The body of Voldemort, which had not been a body, did not, on the strike, fall. The body of Voldemort, which had not been a body, did the thing the dementor had done on the train, except in reverse, and except in slower. The body of Voldemort, where the arrow had gone in, did not, on the visible level, do anything. The body of Voldemort, on the level the arrow had gone in to find, was, in a count of 1, on fire. The fire was not fire. The fire was sun. It went in the count of 2 seconds through the lattice of the man, and round the inside of the man's own private dark, and along the small thin line between the man's ribs on which, for many years, the man had hung the small particular fragment that had not properly belonged to him. The fragment in the sun did the thing fragments do. It came off. It came off cleanly. It came off without a sound. It came up in the man's chest into the small thin space below his collarbone, and it came out in the space below his collarbone, and it stood in the air above him for the count of 1 as a small black-edged flake of nothing, with a small thin scream in the center of it that was not, by any of the accounts present, in any of the languages spoken in the courtyard. Voldemort on the strike did not fall. Voldemort on the strike took 2 steps backward, and the 2 steps were, by his own measure, the first physical steps he had taken in 12 years on the bridge or otherwise. He looked down. He looked at his own chest. He looked at the small, thin flake of nothing in the air above his collarbone. He looked, for the first time in many years, with the eyes of a man who had, in his life, been, on a particular afternoon, Tom Riddle. The eyes did briefly the thing his servants would afterwards describe in 3 different ways, none of which were, by any of their own accounts, quite the right way. The eyes briefly focused. The eyes briefly were the eyes that had, on a particular morning, in a particular orphanage, in a particular bed, looked up at a woman who was not his mother and had said, "Yes, please." The eyes saw the bow. The eyes saw the boy. The eyes saw what they were at last looking at. They stayed focused for, by the count of the boy at the parapet, 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Harry, by his own internal metronome, raised the wand. He did not say the spell. He did not need to. The spell at this distance had been said in the boy for some weeks. The spell at this distance had been said in the boy for a number of years. The wand spoke. The light from the wand, this time, was the green light Hagrid had told him about in the hut on the rock in the sea, except that the green light this time was not the green light. The green light this time was the light of his mother on the kitchen step at number 4 with the small hand on the small stomach, looking at the morning, and the green light this time was, by every measure he could give, the light he had been carrying in his right wand arm since the age of 2. The light went across the courtyard. The light went into Voldemort. The light did not in Voldemort reflect. The light did not in Voldemort divide. The light went in him the way the sun had in him gone through the lattice, except this time the lattice was the man. He did not on the second strike fall. He came apart. He came apart slowly, the way a knot comes apart when the string of it has been quietly cut in the middle by a knife. He went from one piece in 2 seconds to no pieces. The robe he had been wearing went down, on the stone of the courtyard, in the small sad heap of a robe with no man in it. The wand he had been holding fell with the robe. The wand on the stone did not, where it fell, ring. The wand on the stone where it fell sat. The 3 at the doors who had been watching did not, at first, move. Harry, at the parapet, did not at first move. The dawn, by his own measure, was not on this hour due. The dawn, on the long edge of the courtyard, came up anyway. Not the dawn of the morning, although that in due course would also come. The dawn of the small private kind that had, since the temple in Greece, been at the inside of the boy, and that had, on this evening in the count of 2 seconds, leaned out for the count of 2 seconds, and was now leaning back. It went up over the parapet in the small straight line of the bow's draw and out across the bridge, and along the bridge to the other side and out faintly, very faintly, to the far edge of the lake. The water for the count of 1 took the color of the morning. The water on the count of 2 was the water of any night. The 3 at the doors moved. They did not, however, move toward the boy. They moved toward each other. They had, in the long dark of the bridge, conferred in their own quiet way on their own quiet contingencies. They lowered their wands. They lowered their hoods. They walked with their hands a little out from their sides in the universal posture of men who had, by their own count, been on the wrong horse toward the door of the entrance hall. They went through. The door at the inside was met by a number of teachers and aurors who had, in the last hour, by previous arrangement, been waiting. The 3 went down with their hands on their heads, the way men of their kind go down, which is with the small bitter pride of men who had, by their own measure, run, at the last, out of road. The courtyard, after they had gone, was empty. Harry stood at the parapet for some time. The bow in his left hand had, at some point in the last 2 minutes, put itself out. The bow was on his palm, the wood it had been on the morning of his 15th birthday. He set it with the small, careful gesture of a man returning a borrowed thing, on the parapet beside him. He did not, after he set it down, pick it up again. He walked, after a count of 20, to the center of the courtyard. He looked down at the robe on the stone. He did not at the robe kneel. He did not at the robe kick. He stood beside it. He looked at the wand on the stone beside the robe. The wand on the stone was a long, pale stick. It was, in the dark, less than a stick. It was, in the dark, the absence of a wand. He turned. He walked to the door of the entrance hall. The door, at his approach, opened. Hermione, on the inside, had her hand on the doorframe and did not, when the door opened, move. Ron, behind her, did not, when the door opened, move. Neville, behind Ron, did not, when the door opened, move. The three of them stood on the inside of the door for the count of 2, and on the count of 3 Hermione, in her formal vocabulary, said, "Harry, yes, you did it. I did it. He is, yes." And the "yes," the fragment out, she nodded. She did not ordinarily cry. She did not cry now. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, with the small, careful touch of a person who had, in her own way, in her own house, in her own fashion, raised her best friend. And she said, in the small voice she had not used much since they had been 11 on the train, "All right." "All right," said Harry, who had said "all right" a great many times in his life, and who, on this occasion, said it in the small voice he had used on the train 4 years ago for a different sentence. Behind Hermione, Ron took Harry's other shoulder. Behind Ron, Neville took Ron's. Behind Neville, McGonagall, who had been on the staircase for some time and who had, on the staircase, allowed, by the count of her own private record, a single short release of breath that nobody, except McGonagall, had heard, came down the last step and did not, by her own quiet code, ever afterward speak of any of the foregoing in any of these words. The corridor outside Snape's office was empty when Harry reached it. An hour later, in a clean robe Hermione had found him from somewhere, with his hair combed by his own hand for the first time in 3 days, with Ron and Hermione, by previous private agreement, 2 corridors back. The door was closed. The light at the bottom of the door was no longer, by his own measure, the light of a man at a desk. The light at the bottom of the door was the small, soft yellow of a single candle on a stand. He stood at the door. He did not knock. He lowered, instead, his head with the small inclination Chiron had told him was the right form. He stood there with his head lowered for the count of 5. He turned. He went away. He did not at any later time refer to the man on the other side of the door as a hero. He did at every later time, on every record, in every conversation, pay, in his own small, careful way, the interest the man had in the office asked him to pay. The morning came up at 23 minutes to 6, over the lake, in the way the morning came up in the Highlands in May, which was slowly, and from below, as if the day were rising out of the water. The castle on the hill took, on its eastern face, the first long stripe of the new light. The lake in the new light went the color the lake was once a year. The forest on the far bank did not in any visible way change. Harry was at the parapet of the small courtyard. He had, by his own private oath, intended to be at the parapet of the small courtyard. He was not, by his own private oath, alone. Hermione was on his left. Ron was on his right. Neville was a step behind Ron. Behind Neville, in the small, unassuming line that the 4 of them had, in the last 7 hours, arrived at without discussion, was a long and lengthening row of people, some of whom Harry knew by name, and some of whom Harry knew by face, and some of whom Harry knew, on this morning, only by the fact of their having, in the long dark of the night, walked. The courtyard at this hour did not have in it the man Voldemort had been, The courtyard at this hour did not have in it the robe. The courtyard at this hour did not have in it the wand. The courtyard at this hour had in it the small clean dust of stone on which a great deal of weather had in the last hour blown across. Harry stood at the parapet. He set his hand on the stone. The stone was warm. He lowered his head. After a long time, when the first stripe of the dawn had become the second, and the second had become the third, he raised his head and turned and looked at the line of people behind him, and the line of people behind him, in the small respectful way of a line of people on a morning of this kind, lowered their heads in return and raised them and looked at him. He spoke. He did not speak loudly. He did not in his life have on any morning speeches. He said, "We have in the night lost. We have in the night also won. We will in the day count the cost, and we will in the day also take the win. There will be on the day time for both. There will be on the day also a kettle. There is always in this castle a kettle. The morning is as you see up. I should like, with your permission, in the count of the next 10 minutes to go to the kitchens and to put the kettle on." There was from the line a small dry laugh of the kind that breaks the ice on rivers. He went down to the kitchens. They went after him. The kettle in the kitchens went on. The morning on the lake went on. Chapter 6 in Chapter 7. The choice Godric's Hollow in the second week of May was a small gray village in a small green valley with a small gray church on a small green rise. The graveyard was on the rise. The wall round the graveyard had in places given up in the way old walls do, and a long arm of climbing rose in the place where the wall had given up was reaching over the graves into the soft May air with a dozen pale buds opened, and a dozen more thinking about it. Harry had not been to the village before. He had not until that morning even been quite sure of the road in. He had been driven in the Weasley car by Mr. Weasley, who had driven by his own account, very carefully on account of, as he said, the cargo. The cargo had on the way down been Harry, asleep against the window in the back, and Hermione in the middle with a copy of a small green book on her knees, and Ron on the far side with his hand gently against the back of his mother's seat the whole way, in the small unspoken steadiness of a son who had decided, at some point in the last 6 days, that the steadying was, on the present journey, his. They came up the path to the graveyard at mid-morning. The path had been mown by someone 2 days ago. The grass to either side of it had not. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley stayed at the gate. Hermione and Ron came as far as the third row and stopped and said in the particular way of best friends that they would, if Harry liked, walk on a little further along the wall. Harry liked. He went on alone. The stones in the rows were old and a few in the rows were new. The new ones were, by the standards of the old ones, smaller and were of a paler stone, and had not yet at their bases settled in the way the older ones had. The 2 new ones at the far end of the third row, side by side, were the 2 he had come for. The one on the left was James Potter's. The one on the right was Lily Potter's. The dates on them on the second line were the same. The first lines with their names on them were the names he had since the age of 7 repeated to himself in the dark in a cupboard in a list of 2 when there had been nobody else in his own life to put on it. He went with his hands in his pockets in the small reserved way he had to the one on the right. He stood at it. He did not at it kneel. He did not at it kick. He stood. He read the lines on it. He looked at the small bunch of white flowers some person had left, in the last day or so, at the foot of the stone. He did not know who the person was. He decided while he was there that the person could, for the moment, remain unknown, and that he was on his own count grateful to them. After a while, with the small inclination Chiron had taught him in the office at the beginning of all of this, he lowered his head. He stayed lowered for some time. When he raised it, there was, in the row beside him, between his mother's stone and his father's, a man. The man was not tall. The man was, for the present occasion, not tall. the man had, on the parapet of the astronomy tower, the height to walk along the parapet without having to stoop. The man had, this morning in the graveyard, the height of a man who is standing in a graveyard with someone he is very fond of, and who has, on the present occasion, decided to be by an inch lower than the person he is standing with. He had on his shoulder a satchel of soft brown leather. He did not, on the present occasion, carry the lyre. Harry did not at first speak. The man did not at first speak either. He stood with his hands a little apart, in the small, precise way he had stood in the temple and on the parapet, and he looked, with the small, private, pleased look of a man who had, in the matter at hand, gotten the moment right, at the stone with his old friend's name on it. "She is," said Apollo softly, "with her people. Yes, that is by my count the right thing. Yes, he is beside her with his. Yes, that is also the right thing. Yes." The man lowered his head in the small inclination Chiron had taught him to Harry's mother's stone. He did not, in the lowering, ham it up. He had, on the way down, thought about whether he was going to ham it up. He had decided on the path that he would not. He had, on this point, taken counsel from his sister, who had told him, in the small, dry way of his sister, that on this morning he was, on no account, to ham it up. He had, on this point, listened. He raised his head. "Walk with me, my son," he said. All right, they walked. They went along the wall, past Hermione and Ron, who, at the right moment, found a particular interesting bird in a particular tree on the far side of the wall, and went over to look at it, past Neville, who, when he saw them with the small, useful tact Neville had developed in his 15th year, found a particular interesting stone, past Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, who, at the gate, with the small, useful tact Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had developed over 25 years of being parents to 7 children, looked, very intently, at a poster on the notice board about jumble sales. They went out of the gate of the graveyard. They went along the path. They went down to the small gray village and round the village, and up by a low track that climbed between the geraniums of the cottages, to a small green rise on the far side of the valley from which the village and the church and the graveyard sat in the small clean morning in their pretty arrangement. They stopped on the rise. They sat. The grass at this distance was warm. "Harry." "Yes. I have been told by my own people that I have in the matter of you comported myself well." "All right." "I have been told by my sister that this is, by the standards of my own people, low praise." "All right. I shall in my own private records take it as high." "All right." He laughed. The laugh had 3 notes, of which the third again was tender. He had in the last 7 hours had a difficult conversation with his own sister, in which his sister had, in her small, dry way, said to him, in 3 sentences he had committed to memory, more or less the same thing the 7 hours of the conversation had been about. He had, in the laugh on the rise, with the boy beside him, given the conversation the small private credit it deserved. "I have come," he said, "to do 2 small things." "All right. One of them I shall do. One of them I am asking your permission to do. The asking is in itself a thing I am, by the standards of my own people, doing for the first time in a long time. It is, I think, on the matter the right thing." "All right. The first small thing is the asking." "Ask." "My son, there is a country on the other side of the door I am on this morning holding open. The country has in it my people. The country has in it your half-sisters and your half-brothers. The country has in it training and lessons and brawls and a mess hall, and a centaur with very firm opinions on the breakfast porridge. The country has in it also a small private room I have prepared for you in the house I keep, in which there is a bed of the right size and a window facing east and a bow on the wall above the bed, on the off chance that at any time between this morning and the end of your life, you should choose to come and sleep in it for a night or a fortnight or a year or longer by your own measure as you wish." "All right. You have not yet been there. You have not yet seen the country. You have not yet met my people. You have not yet met your half-sisters and your half-brothers. You have not yet by any count made a decision. All right. I am not on this morning asking you to make one. All right. I am asking you to know for the count of as long as you live that the door is open. I know, my son. I know. Good. He lowered his head in the small inclination Chiron had taught him to a small 13-year-old boy he had walked into a room with for the first time at the start of all of this, and who had in the meantime gotten, by his own quiet measure, on with the rest of it. The second small thing, Apollo said, is mine. I shall with your permission do it. What is it? I shall give you on this rise my blessing. All right. He did not, in the giving of it, do the things he might, by the standards of his own old plays, have been expected to do. He did not stand. He did not raise his arms. He did not, with theatrical gravity, declaim. He sat on the warm grass with his elbows on his knees, in the small folded posture in which he had once, very long ago, sat on the steps of his temple and had explained, to a witch who had climbed his hill in a thunderstorm, the small specific thing he could and could not do for her son. He sat on the warm grass, the way a father sits with a son when the father has, at last, found he had less to say than he had thought he would. He set his hand briefly near Harry's hand, with the careful held distance he had used in the temple and on the parapet, and at the courtyard at dawn. He did not at first touch. Then, with the small grave precision of a man who had been told by his own sister that he was on this morning allowed, he set his hand very briefly on Harry's wrist. He said in his own private voice the small words he had been working on for 16 years. My son, may the morning be kind to you. May the evening be kinder. May your own people in the country of your mother, by whose laws you have decided to live by my count well, give you, on the count of every morning and every evening, the small good things that, in this life, count, in the long ledger, the most. May the friends you have made in your time last. May the friends you have not yet made in your time find you. May the bow on the wall in the room I have prepared for you never be needed, and in the case that it is needed, may it be at hand. May the wand at your side in the long count of your country be the wand, by every measure, of your mother, who, in her time, on the rolls of her country, was the brightest of her year. I, Apollo, son of Zeus, on this small green rise on this small gray morning, with my hand on your wrist, in the small private voice of a father who has, in the meantime, learned to use it, give you my blessing. He lifted his hand. The blessing did not, by Harry's own measure, do anything visible. The grass was the grass. The May was the May. The village in the valley did the village thing. The blessing did, by his own measure, on the inside of his own chest, do a small specific thing. The thing was, in the moment, not nameable. The thing was, by the slow measure of years, going to be the small steady warmth in the kernel of his body where his mother had carried him, that he was, for the rest of his life, on the long list of small steady warmths, going to keep at the top. He turned. He looked at the man beside him. The man beside him was not, for the present occasion, tall. The man beside him was, for the present occasion, by his own private count, simply a man. Apollo, my son. I shall, Harry said, in my own time come. I know, not today, I know, and not perhaps soon, I know. I have, Harry said, in the country of my mother a great deal of work. I know, and I shall in the country of my mother do it. I know, my son. They sat for a count of 3 in silence. After the count of 3, Apollo said, I shall go now. I shall not on the present morning ham it up. I shall not in the leaving leave a great noise. I shall not in the sky make a thing of it. I shall in the small modest way I have lately been working on simply by your leave get up. All right. He stood. He brushed, with the small lazy gesture of a man who had been on warm grass on hills for thousands of years, the seat of his trousers. He set, with the small careful gesture of a man returning a borrowed thing, his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. Goodbye, my son. Goodbye. He turned. He went up the small green rise 3 steps and then 4. At the 5th step he was, by Harry's count, gone. There was no thunder. There was no flare. There was, in the air round the place where he had been, the small, soft warmth of a candle that has, on a quiet evening, gone out. The drive back to the Burrow that evening was the small, quiet drive of a car with 5 people in it who had, on the day, used most of the words they had, and who were, on the way home, content to use no more for a while. Mr. Weasley, at the wheel, drove again, by his own account, very carefully. Mrs. Weasley, in the front seat with her hand against the window, watched the country go by. Hermione, in the back with the small green book on her knees again, did not, on the drive, open the book. Ron, on the far side with his hand again against the back of his mother's seat, kept it there. Harry, in the middle, with the small, soft warmth in the kernel of his body that had been at the top of the list since the rise, watched the road through the windscreen and the country through the side window in equal measure. They came into the lane to the Burrow at 5:30. The light on the lane was the light of an English May at 5:30, which was, by Harry's measure, a good light. The Burrow at the end of the lane did the leaning thing. Mr. Weasley at the gate set the handbrake. Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen set the kettle. Hermione on the kitchen step sat down. Ron beside her sat down. Harry at the door went in. There had been, the day before they had gone to Godric's Hollow, a small private service at Hogwarts. The service had not, by anyone's design, been advertised. The service had not, by anyone's design, been attended by photographers. The service had been at the side of a small green plot at the edge of the lake, in a place Harry had not, in his 6 years at the school, before then, been told there was a plot. The plot on the morning of the service had had, in it, 1 new stone of the same pale stone as his mother's at Godric's Hollow, with a single name on it and 2 dates, and at the bottom a single line in Old Greek that Hermione, in her formal vocabulary, had translated for them, on the way over the bridge as, "He gave the count of 11 seconds." The line had not, by Harry's quiet measure, been the line he would have chosen. The line had not, by his quiet measure, been the line he would not have chosen either. The line had been the line the man had, in the office, asked him to remember. McGonagall at the service had read, in her stern, dry brisk, 3 short paragraphs from a piece of paper she had not, by Hermione's later count, taken from her pocket. The piece of paper had been, by Hermione's later count, a piece of paper she had been holding in her hand. The hand on the paper had not shaken. The reading in the brisk had not, in any of its sentences, used a softer word than the word it had needed. Dumbledore at the service had not, in his time at the head of the small group of mourners, made a speech. Dumbledore at the service had set, on the foot of the new stone, a small green sprig of rosemary. He had stood with his hands behind his back for some minutes. He had after some minutes said only, "Severus." He had, after the saying of it, lowered his head, in the small inclination Chiron had, on a Wednesday in November, taught a small 13-year-old boy was the right form. He had stood with his head lowered for some time. Harry had stood beside him. Harry had said nothing. Harry had paid, in the quiet way the man in the office had asked him to pay, the small amount of the interest that the morning had been, by his own count, the right morning to pay. After the service, on the walk back along the bank of the lake, Dumbledore, who had, throughout, walked with his hands behind his back, had said very quietly to Harry, in the small dry voice he used for the sentences he meant most, "Harry." "Yes, sir." He was, in his time at this school, a great deal more difficult than he was, in his time at this school, dishonorable. "Yes, sir." "In a long career, Harry, that distinction in any man is, by my measure, the one that in the long ledger counts. I am on the morning glad I was here in this castle in the year to make it." "Yes, sir." "You will, in your own life, in your own ledger, in your own way, also have it to make. You will, in your own time, find the words for it. The words will not on the day be the words I have on this morning used. They will be your own. They will be by my count the right ones." "Yes, sir." They had gone back along the bank to the castle. Harry had not, since the morning of the service, spoken of the man in the office in any words other than the words the man had in the office asked. Harry had, since the morning of the service, in his own private record, in the way the man in the office had asked, paid the small amount of the interest in the small specific way the man had asked it to be paid, which was, in the form of on certain afternoons in his own life, telling in private the truth. He had at 15 been told a thing in a room. He had at 16 been asked to remember it. He had at 16, in the months of the present summer, begun, by his own quiet measure, to remember it the way a thing of that kind was best remembered, which was, in the long ledger of an ordinary life, in the small undramatic places, on certain afternoons. Chiron met them at the edge of the forbidden forest a week later. He was, on this occasion, in the same green wool jacket. He was, on this occasion, leaning against a beech in the way of a teacher who had, on his afternoon off, decided to take the air. He inclined his head in the small civil bow of a man who had been received properly, and Harry, who had had, in the year of his life since he had last seen the centaur, a great deal of practice, returned the bow in the right form. Chiron said, "Young hero." "Sir, you are well, I am well. You have by my count made your choice, I have. You have not by my count rejected the other, I have not. That is the better way. Yes, you will by my count in some season come down through the trees and see us. I will. In the meantime, young hero, the door of the country remains open. If at any time you have a son or a daughter of your own who wishes in their own season to walk through it, the door is in the matter of your own children also open. The country is not in our long history in the habit of closing its doors. It opens them. It opens them sometimes slowly. It does not in any case close them. Thank you, sir." "Be well, young hero, and you, sir." The centaur stepped, with the small precise pivot of a horse who knew the limits of indoor furniture and the larger limits of forest paths, into the trees. He did not, on the going, look back. The trees where he had been took, for a count of one, the small soft pause that the trees of a forest take when they have, on the path, recently been brushed by a kind person. They went on then with the small private business of being trees. The kitchen of the borough that summer was warm in the way the kitchens of houses with 7 children were warm. There was, on the table, a cake. The cake was, by the standards of cakes, large. The cake had, by the standards of cakes, no business being on the table at 11:30 in the morning. Mrs. Weasley had, in the kitchen, decided that the cake was on the table at 11:30 in the morning anyway, on the grounds that, on the present summer, the rules about cakes were in this house suspended. There was, on the small wireless on the dresser, a song from before the war. There was, by the door, a pair of boots that had in the last week been on Ron's foot, rather longer than they had ever been, and that Ron, in the way of growing boys, was making, by his own private campaign, peace with. Harry was at the kitchen table. Hermione was on his left. Ron was on his right. Ginny, by the window, was tying back the curtain, with the small, absent care of a girl who had done it 100 times. Mr. Weasley, by the back door with the wireless, was conducting, with one finger, the song from before the war. Mrs. Weasley was at the stove. The kettle on the stove was on. There was, at the back of Harry's chair, where the wood of the chair did on this morning the thing wood does, a small thin rim of warm light, very faint, that was not the light of the kitchen, and that Harry, by his own quiet rule, had given up 4 years ago. The small private project of pretending was not there. Ron, looking at it sideways, said, "Mate." "What?" "Your chair is on fire." "It is not on fire. It is, mate, doing the thing. It is doing the thing. Tell it to stop doing the thing. Mum'll throw it out." "I will, Ronald, throw the chair out," said Mrs. Weasley mildly from the stove, "if it is on fire." "It is not on fire," said Hermione in her formal vocabulary. "It is, by the precedent of the 7th century Frankish witch whom Bagshot mentions in her footnote, an instance of the residual theurgic signature, in this case, on furniture, which, on the basis of the literature, will in approximately 3 to 5 minutes dissipate on its own, of its own accord, without intervention." There was at the table the small dry pause that in this house, in this kitchen, on this morning, in the small good way of the present summer, regularly preceded a particular response. "Bloody hell," said Ron. "Ron, what? I am committing to it. I have been committing to it for 4 years." "You have been for 4 years, Hermione." "Ron, 4. "Eat your cake, Ronald," said Mrs. Weasley. He ate his cake. The chair, in 3 to 5 minutes on its own, of its own accord without intervention, dissipated. The morning in the kitchen went on. The kettle on the stove came off. The cake on the table was halved and quartered and eighth. Mr. Weasley at the door let the wireless finish the song from before the war. Ginny, at the window, tied back the second curtain. Hermione at the table in her formal vocabulary said something very quietly to Harry that nobody else in the kitchen properly heard. Harry at the table said, in answer, the small word he had been using for a great many sentences in his life, and that on this morning in this sentence was, by his own quiet rule, the word he meant. He said, "All right." At 5:30 in the morning of the first day of September, 2 months later, Harry was at the small high window of the dormitory at the top of the tower at the Burrow, with his elbows on the sill in his old dressing gown, watching the line of the sky over the orchard come up from black to gray to, very slowly, the small, clean, warm rim of the day. The chickens in the yard below were making the chicken sound. The cockerel on the gate was practicing. The orchard between the gate and the road was 3 weeks short of yielding. The road between the orchard and the village was empty. He had on the small table beside the bed the trunk packed. He had in the trunk his wand. He had in the trunk his cloak. He had in the trunk a small wooden box with a green ribbon on it. He had in the trunk the small folded parchment in green ink in its old place, against the inside of his chest. He had on the wall above the bed, by Mrs. Weasley's own arrangement, a small embroidered sampler with the words "Be good" on it, which Ron had, on the second night, found very funny. He had on the floor of the trunk under the cloak the unstrung bow. He had, on the count of his own quiet measure, his life ahead of him. He turned from the window. He went down the staircase. He went down by the route he had in the last 2 summers learned, which avoided the 3rd stair from the top, on which Ron, on the 3rd stair from the top, had on the 3rd night snored. He came into the kitchen. The kitchen at this hour was empty. The kitchen at this hour had on the table, by Mrs. Weasley's arrangement, a small folded note that read in her own hand, "There is tea in the pot. There is bread in the bread bin. Eat." Molly, he poured tea. He cut bread. He sat at the table, he ate. After a while Hermione came down. She was in her traveling clothes. She had in her hand a small green leather notebook. She set the notebook on the table beside her plate. She poured tea. She did not at first speak. After a while Ron came down. He was in his traveling clothes. He had in his hand a small wooden chess set. He set the chess set on the table beside his plate. He poured tea. He did not at first speak. The 3 of them ate bread and drank tea and did not at first speak. After a while, when the kitchen had got light enough to see by without the candle, Ron, in his small, steady voice, said, "Hogwarts, then." "Hogwarts," said Hermione. "Hogwarts," said Harry. They finished their tea. They did not, in the finishing, hurry. They washed their cups, the 3 of them, in the small, careful order of people who had been in this kitchen, told at some point by Mrs. Weasley the right way to do it. They went to the door. They went out. They went in the small gray dawn in their traveling clothes with their trunks behind them along the path that ran from the kitchen door, past the chickens, past the orchard to the road. At the gate, Harry stopped. He turned. The burrow was a small leaning house in a small leaning yard at the edge of a small leaning village in the small clean morning, with the cockerel on the gate, and the smoke from the chimney in the still air, rising not entirely straight up, but very nearly. The light on the wall of the burrow was the light it had been on a great many mornings since the year he had been 11. The light on the cockerel was the light it had been on a great many mornings before that. The light on him was the light it had been since, on a hill in another country, in a thunderstorm in 1979, a witch with the brightest aura in a generation had, in a dream, said yes please. He did not, on the morning, look at the cockerel. He looked instead at his own shadow on the gravel of the path. The shadow lay where it lay. The shadow was the size of his body. The shadow had all along its outline the small, thin, warm rim of light that had been there, very faintly since he was 11, and that was, on this morning, ordinary. He did not at the rim smile. He did not at the rim comment in his own head. He looked at it the way a man in the second year of being married looks at the ring on his own hand, which is to say, in the small, unself-conscious way of a person who had, by long practice, gotten used to a thing being there, and who had in the meantime gotten on with it. He turned. He went out of the gate. Hermione on his left fell into step. Ron on his right fell into step. They walked, the three of them in the small gray dawn, down the road toward the village, in the small ordinary way of three friends going back on a particular morning to the particular school they had in their time by their own count decided was theirs. Behind them the cockerel on the gate in the new light did at last the cockerel thing. Above them the sky in the new light did the sky thing. The road in the new light did the road thing. They went on. Chapter 7 End in TH.